two, two, hello. Check, check, check. Two. Bert is in the house. There we go. Not feeling so good after his egg venture. I actually feel totally fine. Feel perfectly healthy. In fact, I am going to start right off with a sip of a very refreshing ice cold Diet Coke. I'm really looking forward to this one. Really looking forward to it. Chin chin, everybody. Oh. Hey, Dakadoon. 100% PSYOP free. That's right. That's the main guarantee of this show. 100% PSYOP free. I'll tell you this much. If this show is a PSYOP, okay, I have no awareness of that.
You're gonna have good old Rob to
okay?
Talk you through all this.
Lennon Smash, thank you for the gifted sub. Thank you, very kind of you. In honor of Egg, thank you. I'm just saying, folks, if it is a PSYOP, I'm not ruling that out, but I have nothing to do with it if that's the case. I'm being weaponized and PSYOPed completely against my will. If that is the case, I don't believe it is. I don't believe it is the case. I don't think this show is a PSYOP, but like, I can't rule out that I'm unintentionally a PSYOP. I can't rule it out. And that's being honest with you. That's just being straight up. That's just being straight up honest with you. Okay? If it was a PSYOP, I would tell you. Did we get called one? No, but I just wanted to shut down any confusion about it. That's all. Well, it's because I think I did want to dig a little bit more into some of the PSYOPs that are at play right now. That's, I think, one of the things that I wanted to try. We've been unraveling lately, talking about this anti-war rally and the LaRouchites and the gray zone. And I kind of wanted to continue unraveling that today, considering the fact that I got into it with that Anya Prompano on Twitter yesterday. And I wanted to dig a little bit more into this kind of gray zone anti-war. Whether you want to call it a PSYOP or not, I don't know. I don't know what is it. I think everything's a PSYOP, okay? I think it's all a PSYOP. But anyway, I want to continue to unravel this. I want to continue to unravel what these people are about. Why aren't you wearing your Not a PSYOP shirt? I should add that into like the lexicon. Like we do the not a cult or a pyramid scheme. It's also not a PSYOP. That I'm aware of. Well, Anya is a fraud, says Worldly Borg. Bong. Sorry. Like other people with the gray zone, Anya is someone that I think has done journalism and commentary before that I've found very helpful in the past. We talked about one of Anya's tweets like last week when we were making fun of that guy, George Monbiot, saying that she was doing like Kremlin propaganda for pointing out like factual things about Ukraine, right? Like we talked about that like last week. And I talked about her tweet, which was 100% factually accurate, and why Monbiot was full of shit. But now, unfortunately, we got a minor beef brewing, because not only did Anya kind of appear at and endorse this rally over the weekend, this like LaRouchite libertarian team up anti-war rally, but also then used the opportunity to really dive into this like culture war shit, and is now contributing to the sort of trans panic, and really like explicitly throwing trans people like under the bus, and kind of coming down on one side of this, like on the conservative side of this kind of culture war issue, as well as the anti-vax stuff, right? Ben left purely because of the good things Gray Zone does to get undermined by the BS they do. Not just Anya, but also Blumenthal's Spawn. This is it. I mean, this is what... And people get radicalized by Gray Zone, and this is all part of the op. I guess we're just diving into this. I guess we're just diving right into it. But I feel like this is part of the op, because Gray Zone has always done quality reporting and journalism on anti-war issues, or like anti-imperialist issues. Not always, but in certain cases, and sometimes does, I think, highly valuable commentary on Ukraine, on China, on, you know, on Venezuela, Iran, any issue that the United States led imperialists are promoting. Same with Max Blumenthal, right? Max Blumenthal, I think, has done valuable reporting and commentary on Israel, especially, also supporting Palestinians. But at the same time, over the last year especially, they've dived into these reactionary culture war positions when it comes to like the anti-vax stuff. You see Jimmy Dore is a part of this as well. The anti-vax stuff, the sort of anti-woke whatever, the anti-trans stuff, you know? So I think it's worth talking about this. And this is the exact thing that we see with the LaRouchites that we've been talking about over the last couple of days. These prominent journalists or commenters or whoever that are talking about these foreign policy issues, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, Taiwan, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Venezuela, Iran, or whatever other country, Israel, Palestine, whatever other country, they then make these positions, which a lot of the time are based in facts, are based in like totally correct analysis of imperialism, and they make these correct views totally toxic by veering off into these fucked up reactionary directions at the same time. And they become associated. These kind of correct foreign policy views then become super muddled, and people end up rejecting the good parts, the true and correct things about what they say, because they're spouting off about anti-trans bullshit or anti-vax bullshit or whatever. Hello, Husker. What is up? It's not just anti-vax. Max also has a bizarre position on the truckers' convoy as well. We were talking about it in the context of the LaRouchites, exactly. Making them sound like some salt-of-the-earth proles when those truckers were just rich white supremacists. I mean, this is the exact thing. You know, it's not just Gray Zone. It's not just Jimmy Dore. It's the Pat Sock movement, the MAGA communist movement, everything. It's these people that use Marxist language, which again, as we've talked about endlessly, when you talk about the origins of fascism, use Marxist language and use correct Marxist analysis to then lead people down this path of reaction and libertarianism and conservatism. Glenn Greenwald as well. I feel like what Gray Zone is doing now, what Max and Anya and people at the Gray Zone are doing now, is identical to what the exact playbook that what Glenn Greenwald did in like 2008 to 2018, I guess. I was a huge fan of Glenn Greenwald's writing and reporting on the Obama administration drone warfare and wireless assassination program, the spying stuff. Glenn Greenwald did a lot of really important as much as he takes criticism now, and I think this gets downplayed now because how off the deep end he's gone over the last couple of years. It was hugely valuable for me as I was like getting into learning about and talking about and reading about these issues. Like I wouldn't be where I am today without Glenn Greenwald. And it's literally the exact same strategy, though, is to bring people in through this kind of like truthful reporting on like anti-war issues or security state issues, and then pulling them into this reactionary world using this kind of rhetoric. You see Tucker Carlson, a big example of that as well. So, if anything if there's a PSYOP going on when it comes to these people, whatever you want to call them, the Pat Sucks, the LaRouchites, the MAGA communists, the Jimmy Dore people, the Gray Zone people, whoever, if there's a PSYOP, I think that's what it is. If there's a PSYOP going on, I think that's the purpose of it, is to bring people in using this serious security state criticism and criticism of genuine, real imperialist issues, and then pulling them into this world of reactionary positions and conspiracy. And it's a way to delegitimize these very factual things that they report on in many cases. Did you see Matthew Heimbach, former leader of the Nazi Traditionalist Workers' Party and Charlottesville organizer, gathering a crowd around himself at the peace rally put up by LaRouchites this weekend with the Soviet flag? Yes, I did see that. And this is the whole fundamental flawed reasoning with this like argument that these people make. Well, we need to ally with these people. We need to ally with the far right. We need to ally with the, God, I'm having a hard time pronouncing normal words. We need to ally with the libertarians on these security state issues. But also, the unspoken thing when they say this is that, you know, who we're not going to ally with is like trans people, trans men and women. We're not going to ally with people that are concerned with social justice or racial justice or systemic racism or any of these issues, because that's all liberal identity politics shit, you know? So that's the fundamental flaw in that reasoning. Of course, we have to ally with these libertarian weirdos and fascists. Of course we do, because we're trying to take on the deep state. We're taking on the security state. But simultaneously, by allying with those people, rejecting LGBTQIA people, rejecting indigenous people, you know, rejecting
you can count on
people that care about these social issues correctly.
All this.
That's wokeism. That's right. And thank you, Don Dark Sony, for the gifted sub. Thank you very much, Don Dark Sony. I appreciate it. I haven't heard the anti-trans comments from these guys. We'll take a look. Well, I'll get into, this is like a minor beef zone. This is just a minor beef zone. Hello, fellow wokes. Hey, we're woke in here. Oh. Same with TYT. Big stepping stone for me. Helped me, but goddamn if they haven't really bucked up lately with the homeless crime shit on top of other complaints I have. I mean, at least I will say this for TYT, is that at least they still have like a progressive veneer, even though a lot of the progressive main talent of TYT, I think, have embraced some very reactionary positions, but they still do a lot of really good commentary and reporting outside of that. I would say. Gray Zone did some good reporting around especially the Xinjiang issue, but they've always had a reactionary bent, especially more so since COVID. Well, that's what I mean. Like, and you could say to Glenn Greenwald is similar, right? They've got, like, COVID has really like exacerbated this shift from being like, you know, doing from when it comes to either of these folks, like legitimate security state reporting, and then trying to appeal to these like anti-vax audiences and the anti-woke crowd, and just basically just transitioning it into as basically libertarianism, right? It's like libertarianism with a kind of like correct and some kind of Marxist influenced anti-imperialist analysis, but overall this kind of very libertarian and reactionary viewpoint. That's basically the editorial line that they're pushing. Yeah, absolutely. Ben Norton, I think Ben deserves kudos for that, because Ben has always done good reporting on these issues and apparently had no interest in being part of that kind of like shift into this reactionary direction. Anyway, let's look at this tweet from yesterday. And again, in case anyone gets the wrong idea here, I think Anya and people at the Gray Zone, I think, have done valuable reporting on anti-imperialist issues, on Israel, on Iran, on Venezuela, on China, on Russia and Ukraine especially. But we need to, I think we'll be able to understand like what exactly is going on here. So here's her tweet from yesterday, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about. And frankly, I was kind of amazed here that I kind of managed to... I'm going to shut off the music here while we get serious. Frankly, I was kind of amazed that I kind of got Anya, I think, in this moment, to sort of give the game away here. How do we know that this is not a PSYOP? Well, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, Real Sugar Fit, I'm like, if it was a PSYOP, I would tell you, number one. And I've been open and honest about the fact that if I am an inadvertent or an unknowing PSYOP, I guess that's a possibility that I can't guarantee. I can't guarantee that I'm not an unknowing PSYOP. I broke FDA rules and regs yesterday. That's right. That's how you know. I'm willing to get down and dirty like that. If I was a PSYOP, I would tell you, but again, there is a possibility. It's a remote possibility. I don't think this is the case. Turns out some of these people are really just conservative. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. Yeah. Anyway, I don't think it is the case personally, but I can't rule it out. I can't definitively say no. This is not. I'm not an inadvertent PSYOP, because like I just don't know. Maybe we're the PSYOP and you don't have a show. I mean, maybe that's it. Like, I don't know which one is if you were real. You could all be sitting in like the basement of the FBI building right now. And I'm sure you're all having a big laugh. You've got me tied up over here, while all the rest of you are just like a bunch of feds, just like driving me in circles all day, keeping me busy over here. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. Anyway. The funny thing about this rally and everything is like the idea that they've tried to push back on this idea. This is not a PSYOP. This is not a LaRouche thing. This is just a genuine coalition of like anti-war libertarians and other people that have all these aligning viewpoints, and we're going after the security state together. Meanwhile, behind her, there's the massive LaRouche signage. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to say that like they're not deeply implicated in this, or that this whole LaRouche fixation is some like deranged paranoid conspiracy theory. Like there's literally a massive sign that says LaRouche directly behind her. So I would just, if some or all of you are FBI agents, I would just hope that like maybe some of you have started to give this stuff a second thought, you know? Even one of you, as you're writing out your nightly reports about all the stuff that I say on here, maybe even some of you are like, am I the bad guy? Like some of that's, I know I got assigned to this guy because he's a dangerous radical, but some of what he says makes a lot of sense. I hope that at least one or two of you have started to second guess these few things. Going after the security state by inviting AFRICOM officer Tulsi Gabbard. And as we're going to see, I get her to openly talk about this. So first of all, yeah, there's the LaRouche sign at her speech here. And here's her tweet. She says, "We can debate whether or not teenage girls should have to share locker rooms with biological males later. If the U.S. continues down this war path, those questions won't matter." And first of all, I think this is a lame cop-out because she's kind of trying to suggest like we shouldn't get bogged down in these culture war issues. But just with the language, she's taking the conservative side in the culture war. She's not saying she's above it. She's literally taking the conservative reactionary position on this culture war issue in this tweet, while simultaneously pretending to be above these culture war issues. You know, that's the first absurd thing, right? That's the first absurd thing, right, in this opening sentence. You know, it's really silly. They're not above these culture war issues. They're literally coming down on the, and they're, again, as we've talked about many times on the show, there's a huge, like, unprecedented trans panic going on right now. You know, trans people are under threat. They're under assault by the state right now. And like a dangerous assault on trans people's rights being legislated right out of existence. Gender affirming care for not even kids or teenagers, but like adults being rolled back all over the country. And this is what Anya here is then bringing up in this, in this, making this anti-war argument. It's like an anti-war argument that's shitting on trans people at the same time while they're under this reactionary assault right now, which, as we've talked about before as well, was one of the first steps in fascism emerging in Weimar Germany in the first place. This assault on trans people and this enforcing this very rigid gender hierarchy was a central part of the Nazi Party and the Nazi Project to begin with. So, and then she says, be it sanctioning Venezuela, occupying Syria's oil, or convincing you to care about Taiwan, our elite are waging a global war for control at our expense. Ukraine is part of that same battle. So, I mean, this is like, this tweet in and of itself, I think, is really indicative of this exact strategy or editorial line or PSYOP or whatever it is. But it's like, it's mingling these two things together. The correct anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-security state analysis and position, and mixing it, merging it with this reactionary identity politics, anti-trans language, you know? And again, if you're wondering why these things happen, I think that's why, because it ultimately it breaks apart the actual left, like the actual left-wing anti-war position. It's just wrecker. It's wrecker behavior. It's designed to it destabilizes and splits apart the left, rather than uniting around things that should unite everybody with left-wing values, which is being against war, against the security state, and also standing up for marginalized people here and abroad when they're under attack. You know, I don't think that should be too difficult to have this kind of synthesis. And I think, it ends up making people, it delegitimizes this, what I would view as correct, materialist foreign policy analysis. It just delegitimizes that, and it allows anyone, I think, or anyone who articulates these anti-war positions to be lumped into this category of reactionaries. You know, if there is a PSYOP going on right now, I think that's what it is. That's what it is. That's what the point of it is. Huey Newton talked about allying with marginalized groups and the need to criticize where they make political errors, but not to dismiss them out of bigotry. That was in 1970. There's certainly no excuse for it in 2023. No, and again, people like Huey Newton and Fred Hampton and folks like that, these radicals in the 60s and 70s, did make this case that like this movement needs to reach out to and include, view people that might have more reactionary views. But that also doesn't mean, and uniting people around class issues, right? But that doesn't mean accepting their reactionary social views and absorbing them and repeating them, because then that's just alienating to these marginalized groups that we're supposed to be allying with in the first place and protecting, So there's a big difference, I think, between trying to speak to cobble together a broad coalition based on a class analysis which unites all kinds of different people. But that doesn't mean throwing trans people under the bus or, indigenous people or any of these marginalized groups that are struggling for social justice. It means incorporating all of that, right? And bringing people together through the correct part, through the anti-war analysis, through the class analysis. Not just throwing fucking marginalized people under the bus. So you can appeal to bigoted white workers. That's not what the point of these arguments are. So I don't know if we need to see the speech. It's 8 minutes. I guess we can take a look at it if we're talking about this. And again, yeah, it's the Libertarian Party and the People's Party. Like, fuck. And the LaRouche, the big LaRouche sign.
Nick. How is everyone today? This is beautiful. I mean, who could hate this country looking out at it? Look how lovely everything is around us. We have a beautiful day. If only all this were used for good instead of evil right here in the heart of the empire. Look at it. Did anyone come here to D.C. in order to get here? Did they cross state lines? Great. I love to see that because the whole point of this is to overcome barriers, not just ideological barriers or physical barriers as well, to come together and say that we're tired of this war, as many of the speakers have mentioned before me. So I'm honored to be here. I want to, as others have emphasized, how inspiring it is to see former presidential candidates, 4 of them, Dr. Jill Stein, Tulsi Gabbard, Ron Paul, and Dennis Kucinich. They each have their own flavor, but they all decided to show up today.
So I'm just chewing. One moment. Yeah, come on, Dennis. Dennis has got to be better. I just wanted to say the whole state lines thing, that's a reference to the January 6th people, right? So these are the people that they're trying to appeal to. They're trying to take this anti-imperialist message and bring it to anti-vaxxers, anti-trans hysterics, MAGA, Trump, insurrectionary, libertarian types. Like, at a certain point, you just have to admit, they're not making alliances with conservatives. They're just conservatives. They're not saying we need to build a big coalition. They're saying we want a coalition with these reactionary groups. And so it's just, they're just conservatives that have decent foreign policy analysis and views and use some kind of Marxist language in order to kind of come across as being remotely left wing. Transphobes are getting on board with the Kucinich Department of Peace. It's disappointing to see Dennis Kucinich there as well, considering the way that Dennis Kucinich was standing up for trans rights when it was still just like totally normal in our culture and society for like comedians to just like make fun of that and shit on it and just shit on the very idea that trans people deserve rights at all. Dennis Kucinich was talking about these issues in 2006, while people like Jon Stewart were like making fun of him and making jokes about it, and mocking him for it. And now Dennis Kucinich is here hanging out with these people who are explicitly trying to reach out to these transphobic reactionaries and make a coalition with them, Yeah, well, Johnny, we're going to get to this. Let's just watch this for a few more minutes, then we're going to get to the rest of this little conversation that I had with her.
Because
is he not a real one? Well, I mean, I guess he's still a real one, but he looks like a dumbass going to this rally. Again, there's an answer and Code Pink anti-war rally happening next month. Kusina should just go to that one.
they recognize that even though they each come from something different, we don't always get the opportunity to come together and show what this country is actually about, which is what I see in front of me today. I'm also disappointed that there are some people who couldn't share the stage with me today. Is Scott Ritter in the audience? I want to give it up to Scott Ritter. He unfortunately couldn't speak today, but I just want to point out that more than anybody on this stage, Scott is actually someone who knows what it feels like to risk and lose everything, and he did it in order to stand up to the greatest humanitarian catastrophe so far this century, the Iraq War. So thank you, Scott. Unfortunately, even though she's back here with us, you know her and love her. I do too. Medea Benjamin, a legend of the anti-war movement. She couldn't be on stage speaking, and I don't hold that against Medea because I understand what she's up against. But what I do reject are the individuals and the groups who, instead of asking to be a part of this or working with us, having a conversation, they invested all their time into attacking us, smearing us in the most cynical way. And the reality is, building an anti-war movement is not about building anybody's personal vanity political project. It's not about building even necessarily individual parties. It's putting all.
But she is doing that. Sorry, I'm eating an apple. My commentary is punctuated by apple chewing. Just one moment. When she says this is not about anyone's pet political projects, at the same time, explicitly boosting these January 6th insurrectionists, contributing to the trans panic, contributing to the anti-vax hysteria. She's literally contributing to a certain group's pet political projects, deliberately and explicitly, while simultaneously claiming to be above that and against it. Kucinich lost the plot years ago, too, when he was super on board for Russia collusion coverage, I noticed. Kept seeing him on MSNBC focusing on Mueller shit and not talking about systems or processes at all. A shame, because I used to love that Keebler elf looking hot, tall wife having MFer. He is a real one, seriously. But I guess, yeah, you go with, at that point, what's going to keep you relevant. And that's, you get pulled into the Russia shit or this bullshit. Which is funny, Husker, that he was part of the Russia hysteria, while now has done a kind of flip-flop on that and is hanging out with these people. They took an anti-war protest and did what the right wing loves doing more than anything else, turning it into an identity politics thing. Well, that's the fucking thing that we're talking about as well, too, is that they're simultaneously claiming to do the exact opposite of what they're actually doing. You know? They're literally they're piling on these identity politics issues. They're like claiming they're standing firmly in one side of these culture war issues. Whether it's like the MAGA crowd, the insurrectionists, the anti-vax people, the anti-trans people, they're firmly supporting them and then claiming to be like above that kind of stuff. You know, it's very lame.
All of that together over the one umbrella of ending the war. We don't have the luxury in the grassroots when we're fighting for something to say that we want to play clubhouse politics and that we want to sit in the same houses, talk to the same people that we've been talking to for, in some cases, decades, other cases years. And everybody thinks the same, everybody looks the same. That's not fun, that's not growth, and that's definitely not building a movement. So I actually think it's great that people can come together and discuss the areas where they disagree. And, you know, we can debate whether or not teenage girls should have to share locker rooms or compete in athletics against biological males another time.
See, you're not doing it another time, though. You're doing it right now. She's doing it right now. This is such bullshit. This is so cowardly. This is coming down on the side of the transphobes in this like culture war issue that's happening right now and saying, oh, we can do that another time. This is bullshit. She's literally doing it right now, and she's coming down on the side of the reactionaries right now at this very moment. And you got Max Blumenthal smiling like a smug prick behind her at the same time. This was over the weekend. Max Blumenthal, whose fucking dad worked for Bill Clinton, by the way. Not some shoe leather reporter that came up from nothing. Literally one of the elites that he talks about and criticizes constantly. I used to admire that dweeb, and here's the issue, Carrier Wave. Like, this is the problem. Whether it's Max Blumenthal, Anya herself, who, as I've said, has done reporting and commentary that I think is worthwhile. Glenn Greenwald, even Jimmy Dore in the past has said things that it's like before he totally went off the deep end, has said things when it comes to these foreign policy issues that I think are important to talk about. But each and every one of them pull this exact same act. Transphobic and anti-vax rhetoric immediately becomes the story of this protest, and it completely undermines the anti-war message. And this is what I mean, G. Clippy, when we talk about whether this is a op or not, a PSYOP or what have you. That's the inevitable result. And the inevitable result also, for a lot of people, is then when you go around and express correct viewpoints about Ukraine or Taiwan or the Belt and Road Initiative or Venezuela or Iran or whatever. And then you know what people say? They say, are you one of these like anti-vax, like reactionary, anti-trans freaks, libertarians? This is exactly the point, I think, of what is going on here. Whether it's intentional or whether it's just some byproduct of their natural sort of political evolution, or whether there is like an actual funding and purpose to that, whatever it is, that I think is the inevitable result. Anyway, I don't even want to go beyond that. I think that just gives the game away, right? We can debate this later, but she's literally coming down on the reactionary side of that debate at the same moment. Marcus on this is the point. This is Moss. This is exactly it, right? And we can look at this as ourselves later. Marcus on Left Flank Vets was showing Maddo's coverage of this, and all she focused on was the Russian flag wavers and a guy dressed up as a Klingon. And exactly. And then for the MSNBC watchers, when they go home to their dinner tables at Thanksgiving or whatever with their TRRS viewing immune to propaganda correct analysis, grandkids or nephews or what have you, or children, and they start talking about Russia and Ukraine and NATO and talking about these things, they say, whoa, are you one of these like Kremlin sympathizing racist transphobes now, right? It delegitimizes the correct stuff that they do talk about. It's an op, and they tell us that the LaRouches could never do such a professionally produced event. And again, just like, it is funny, the idea like suggesting that the LaRouche thing is some conspiracy or some bizarre fixation when there's literally huge LaRouche signs in the audience. People too often center Umberto Eco in their definitions of fascism. He's good, but I think an important definition for fascism that's a little catchier and important to keep in mind when diagnosing this group is that fascism is when the tools of empire are focused domestically. That's why trans people, black people, Jews are being thrown under the bus here. I think that's a good point, Husker. And I think another building block of fascism, again, is using this Marxist language. You know, well, you can going back to Italy or Germany. That's how these fascist movements begin, and that's how they build this coalition, is by using Marxist language, both about these foreign policy issues and about the economy. But then, of course, it gets mixed with anti-Semitism. It gets mixed with transphobia. It gets mixed with white supremacy. That's why I think it's really important that we continue to make sure that we hold the line on these foreign policy viewpoints, while simultaneously rejecting any effort that people like this are making to bring people into a reactionary movement that targets marginalized people. And we can't let these people dilute or make us question our correct internationalist approach to analyzing foreign policy issues. So if there's some kind of synthesis on this program or some editorial line or whatever you want to call it, that's what it would be. Make the anti-war face the goofiest MFers in the game, like Dor. Yeah, that's the op. But again, it couldn't be more fucking obvious here how anti-war this rally is. Rob, shout out to all the mothers-in-law listening. Shout out to all our mothers-in-law. I'm sure there's a couple of you out there listening right now. We love you. But this gives the game away. As much as they claim to reject these identity politics issues, this is, I think, these identity politics issues don't matter, because what matters is being against the security state and being against war. What this proves, though, is that this isn't even an anti-war rally, even if they do sometimes correctly analyze these foreign policy situations. It is a conservative, reactionary identity politics rally, and here's what proves it. Because I said to Anya, again, who was at one point someone that I still thought had a worthwhile viewpoint, and someone that I had respect for. But I said, I will simply continue supporting trans rights while also being anti-imperialist. As we've been talking about on the show, it is possible to hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. And what does she say? She says, good for you. I'll be hanging out with other women fighting against the timeless evils of misogyny and war. Turns out we have allies too. That's her answer. That's her answer. And then here's what gives the game away. Like Tulsi Gabbard, I asked her, and I shared this clip, and we're going to look at this clip after, and she says, yep. So again, here's your anti-war ally. This is how much of an anti-war rally it is, and this is why we have to abandon these identity politics issues. We have to abandon trans people. We have to abandon social justice. We have to abandon racial justice, because we need to make coalitions with these libertarians and other groups, and we need to stand with people like Tulsi Gabbard. Here's Tulsi just a few months ago, way back in September 14th, 21. Aloha. You haven't heard much from me lately. Well, let's just actually listen to Tulsi right now. This is Anya and Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore's anti-war ally that they need to ally with and throw, trans people and black and brown and indigenous people and people that care about social and racial justice and systemic racism, etc. We've got to throw them under the bus to create allyships with anti-war voices like Tulsi Gabbard.
Aloha, everyone. You haven't heard much from me lately. I've been gone for the last 4 months, serving on an active duty tour and deployment to Africa as a civil affairs officer.
Oh, yeah.
Supporting a special forces mission to go after Al-Qaeda affiliated jihadists. Now, every single day, it was truly
these are the anti-war allies that we gotta connect with.
Patriots, experienced, focused warriors with an unwavering commitment to serve our country. We should never forget that No matter the decisions that the politicians make or the careerists in the Pentagon make, it is our men and women in uniform who selflessly and quietly
Daggett, this clip is from September 14th, 21.
defend the safety, security, and freedom of our country every day. Now, I haven't posted much since I was gone because I was asked not to talk about my going overseas until my mission was complete. Al-Qaeda is very active where we were, and as someone who has a high profile, I would have been a prime target for the enemy, putting my life and the lives of my fellow service members and our mission in greater danger. Now I look forward to discussing the foreign and domestic issues and challenges that we're facing in our country.
So again, these are the anti-war women that Anya Parampil and Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore are telling us we need to bring into our coalition. And she fucking answered. Like, that kind of gives the game away. And if people think it's paranoid to suggest that this shit is an op, like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. When you're like, she's literally giving that away. Like, doesn't that kind of give the game away there? She's literally, working with the fucking PSYOP division and working with AFRICOM. And it's cool because then you had like a lot of people, I was glad that I had this exchange because then you had a lot of, this is like exposing that to like a lot of people. These are the anti-imperialists. These are the anti-imperialists and lecturing us about supporting, encouraging people to get vaccinated or caring about trans rights issues or caring about social justice or systemic racism or police violence. They're lecturing us about caring about these social issues while allying with like actual fucking government agents that are conducting operations like on behalf of the United States military in Africa. Do we see what's going on here? Is it paranoid or a delusional conspiracy to suggest that this is an op? I don't know. But like, if it's not, it's pretty fucking stupid. Just from that reply, you can tell her heart isn't in it. I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn here too much. I do think I kind of like backed her into a corner there. It's the good imperialism. It's different. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, the person who infiltrated the DNC. Totally. And who deliberately, in the wake of the Bernie movement, came in and talking about Tulsi Gabbard and carved off a little chunk of that Bernie movement to bring them down this reactionary path by coming in and endorsing Bernie and leaving the DNC at the last, towards the end of Bernie's campaign. And all of a sudden, had this new audience of these like foreign, and Jimmy Dore and Michael Tracy and all these people went into that camp. When she did bully Kamala out of the race, that was very funny. I agree. I agree that was funny. Rob, are you fed-jacking the literal PSYOP military veteran? I guess so, yeah. And women of color as well, which is something else I saw Anya doing, like claiming to be against identity politics while simultaneously being like, I'm a woman of color and these white men are coming after me. So I don't know. And Anya's out there retweeting Epic Times. Yeah, okay, I saw that was in the Discord server. Where was that? Yeah, and then retweeting Epic Times articles about this. Come on now. Come on. You know, I feel fine, old Dutch. Thanks for asking. You know what I mean, though? Give me a fucking break. Hang on, I'm just gonna get something to drink. I got dry mouth. Got dry mouth syndrome right now. Could have Michael Tracy on. That'd be funny. It would be funny. And again, like that's how ridiculous everything is that this Russia-Ukraine thing has been so effective at splitting people and dividing people. Like Michael Tracy, who I would argue is one of this group of people, basically a conservative that does actually have this correct, oftentimes correct understanding or analysis of these foreign policy issues, including Ukraine. Michael Tracy probably does better commentary on Ukraine than like a lot of people on the left, and certainly like basically everyone in mainstream journalism. That's how fucked up this is. I saw this on Twitch homepage and thought this was Pedro Pascal. I am Pedro Pascal. This is what I do in my spare time. In my spare time when I'm not on the television show The Mandalorian, The Last of Us, Game of Thrones. You might have seen me in any one of these projects. I like to hang out on twitch.tv and talk about these issues. That's like, I think the third or fourth time someone has said that I look like Pedro Pascal. So I think I'm allowed to officially say that like we resemble each other now. That's numerous unrelated comments. Yeah, homepage, not front page. We'll get back there. And Johnny's wife said it yesterday as well. You heard it here first, folks. He came off pretty anti-communist Sunday night, but that was his character, though. I think overall, I think his family were Allende supporters. So yeah, it seems pretty fucking clear what's going on here. Fuck off. Jesus, sorry.
Democratic Party warmongers have pushed us to the precipice of nuclear war. Our leaders have completely failed us. They have put us in this position, knowing that if the worst case scenario occurs, the wealthiest of people in the world know they've got bunkers to protect themselves and their loved ones. So what about the rest of us? What do we do? When Congress was considering a $40 billion bill to escalate this proxy war against Russia, guess how many Democrats voted against it? 0. And so where are these so-called progressives who claim to be champions for peace? Where is Bernie
And here's
Sanders?
the part
Where
that
is
is
AOC?
worth interrogating.
Their silence is deafening. A few years ago in Hawaii, we actually experienced something that forced us.
And this is a big problem as well. How, you know, the mainstream progressive left in America and Canada have completely failed. have completely failed to oppose this war, have failed to have the correct analysis about Russia and Ukraine, have been paralyzed by these accusations of supporting Putin or supporting war, or supporting the invasion. And they've completely failed this test. And they've allowed people like Tulsi Gabbard, like Tucker Carlson, like Michael Tracy, like Jimmy Dore, like these gray zone people, their failure to properly analyze this and have the correct analysis of it has opened the door for this exact line of attack, which again, when they say these things, is compelling to people because it is the actual like real analysis that should be coming from the left, but it's not. The real villain. Well, this is the thing, Sean. Like the real villains are the people not pushing back hard enough, but the people not the people salivating for it. Like I do agree with that also, but that's what I think the problem is. The fact that these people have abdicated this responsibility, it has empowered this PSYOP or this movement, this reactionary, libertarian, anti-war movement. You know, because there's been. Whether it's on Twitch or whether it's on MSNBC, there's very few people coming from the actual left making this kind of like analysis, this materialist analysis of the war in Ukraine, factoring in NATO and the role that the Canadian government and the American government and the UK government and everyone else has played in provoking the conflict. That is the problem. You know, that's the problem. Not that they have power to stop it, but what they have done by completely giving up on this opportunity is empower these reactionaries, to go out there and make these arguments to people. Can't even do a symbolic, worthless vote on record. They can't even send a letter. They can't even send a letter to the Biden administration criticizing this thing or suggesting that there needs to be diplomacy or negotiation. They can't even send a fucking letter. And yeah, of course, when the mainstream left, the progressive left, the social democrats, the anarchists, the liberals, all abdicate this responsibility, then it opens the door to this reactionary movement. So they do deserve criticism for that. But that's the thing. The criticism rings hollow when it's coming from these people that are cobbling together this conservative, reactionary, libertarian movement. You know, this is why I've really appreciated the sort of like breakthrough news editorial line on this, that the PSL I think has been good on, and Answer and these kind of groups, you know, ensuring that the anti-war analysis is correct, and also the commitment to fighting against bigotry, fighting against systemic racism, fighting against transphobia or homophobia or sexism, misogyny, ensuring that all these things are linked, right? Ensuring that that struggle is all connected. Anyway, I was happy to get her to at least admit this, like this strategy. Let me see what else I can throw on here. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this specific issue, but we can get more into Ukraine stuff, or we can talk more about these issues. I wanted to talk about Israel stuff as well. There's a lot of other kind of connected issues we can talk about. I just need to take a little breather. You need to take a little breather. I kind of got off into a rant pretty early there. We're only an hour into the stream, had very little chit chat. So pull back ever so slightly before we dive back in. What do we think about that? Now for some egg discourse. There's no need for more egg discourse. I think I disproved certain theories yesterday. As you can all see, I'm still feeling very healthy today. Doing just fine. In brief, Anya, we need to ally with anti-war women. Like this warmonger? Yes. Okay. Good. Great. That's pretty much how that went. Yes. And again, folks, I can assure you that this show, not a PSYOP. And in fact, I should just take probably just 1 second to, if we have any new viewers or any lurkers or anyone that's interested in finding out what this community is about, this community that has the correct analysis, the correct viewpoint, the correct synthesis, the correct dialectic. If you want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do it. This channel is not a PSYOP. It's not a pyramid scheme or a cult or a scam. What is it? Well, that's a good question. This is what it is.
Thank you for expressing interest in the Friendship Triangle community. We would be thrilled to have you on board as a member of our exclusive platform. As you may know, the Friendship Triangle is Twitch's only two-dimensional, triangle-shaped, friendship access and trickle-down cloud, tiered reward system. Today you have an amazing opportunity to join the base level of the Friendship Triangle system. Once you are part of the community, you'll have the ability to rise through the ranks and achieve higher levels of access and rewards. One way to do this is by gifting subscriptions to your fellow members or by inviting your friends and family members to join our community. As you ascend the tiers, you will be exposed to a range of new and exciting benefits, such as exclusive content, advanced features, and access to our elite community members. We are confident that you will enjoy all the perks that come with being part of the Friendship Triangle. However, we also want to remind you that not all friends and family members are to be trusted, especially those who may not support your new lifestyle. That's why we encourage you to focus on building meaningful relationships within our community, where you will find like-minded individuals who share your interests and values. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We are always here to support our members and ensure that your experience with the Friendship Triangle is enjoyable. We're glad that you are considering joining the Friendship Triangle community. We look forward to seeing you rise through the Chaos Zone and all the way into the Elite tier. It's not a cult.
See, so unlike some of the other PSYOPs and scams and grifters that we've been covering, as you know, that's not what I'm about. That's not what this community is about. That's why I wanted to just put that little video together so people understand like what the community is about. And if you do want to support the work that I do here or the community, please subscribe to the program. That's how this high quality content, which again, the correct analysis stays on the air. You know, this is how we win. This is how we win. When generous community members of this community allow this high quality journalism and commentary to remain on the air. You like that, Husker? As soon as it becomes a PSYOP, you have to tell us. I've already talked about in the past the signal that I have for if I ever do become compromised. Okay? I've already talked about in the past what that is. Believe me, I'll let you know. I will find a way to let you all know. Rob, you also said that you would roll over on us, every one of us, if pressed. I mean, that was a bit. Like I was, the whole thing about this show is that I try to make sure that it's informative and that we kind of learn something and have kind of like some kind of a positive experience, but it also has got to be entertaining, right? It's got to be entertaining. And sometimes I have to dig into the well and go into classic bits like Snitch Rob, the classic character, the classic peripheral character that we all love, which is a joke, which is not a real thing. Snitch Rob. We all love that classic character. See, look at this. It's uncanny. Uncanny. Look at that. Now, I know you think you're just looking at an image of Pedro Pascal right now, but I'm here to tell you that that's actually a face morph with myself and Pedro Pascal. So that's how similar it is you can't even tell that there's anything wrong with this image. It's in that uncanny valley. That's right. You were fantastic in this week's episode of The Last of Us. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Here, John, this is for you. John, this is for you. Shit, how do I do that?
Wow, okay, Rob. Seriously, wow.
I love how my whole video for presentation about 0 subs. This is the kind of humiliation I put myself through as well. The music really pushes it over the edge. Yes, it does. Like, look, this is how I act. I'm a grown adult man. Look at this. Fully egg pilled. It did touch. It did touch. You can see it right there. When Rob's stream began, he played Last of Us. Now he stars in the show. We've come so far. That's right. It's been a journey. It's been quite a journey. According to Sam Gerbs, joining the Friendship Triangle has been a transformative experience that has expanded their horizons, boosted their confidence, and enriched their relationships. Before I met my best friends, I felt like I was stuck in a rut with no clear direction or purpose. Once we started hanging out regularly and sharing our goals and dreams, everything changed for the better, says Sam Gerbs. Wonderful. Wonderful. I also wanted to read, we have our friend Dimitri in the Discord has posted some good quotes about this. This seems kind of interesting.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Don Dark Zoni, for the gifted sub to Morgan is Fine. And thank you also to Don Dark Zoni for helping me work with the fine folks at the Langley video editing
count on
department
me.
to
You're
create
gonna have
that
good
little
old Rob to, talk
VHS
through
style
all this.
advertisement. You know, I had the kind of idea for that video, and Don Darksoni took it down to the folks in the video editing room and really just completely knocked it out of the park. And I got to give it up to all of them. Thank you once again to Don Darksoni for that. So talking about this like PSYOP or this what we're talking about today, this like LaRoucheite movement, this libertarian anti-war movement, whatever you want to call it. Our friend Vlad the Victor here in the Discord said there's a couple of Lenin quotes relevant to today's stream I pulled from the latest Theory Reading Club pick towards a scientific analysis of the gay question. He says working class consciousness cannot be genuine political consciousness unless the workers are trained to respond to all cases of tyranny, oppression, violence, and abuse, no matter what class is affected, unless they are trained, moreover, to respond from social democratic points of view and no other. We must blame ourselves, our lagging behind the mass movement, for still being unable to organize sufficiently wide, striking, and rapid exposures of all the shameful outrages. He is no social democrat who forgets in practice his obligation to be ahead of all in raising, accentuating, and solving every general democratic question. We would be politicians and social democrats in name only, as all too often happens in reality, if we failed to realize that our task is to utilize every manifestation of discontent and to gather and turn to the best account every protest, however small, from what is to be done. And the author's comment. In fact, the RU has abandoned its revolutionary duty to arouse the masses by exposing these concrete examples of reactionary bourgeois rule, and to explain to the working class how these outrageous actions and the bourgeois anti-gay rationale behind them only serves to weaken and divide the working class struggle. Their failure to do so, besides holding back the consciousness and unity of the working class, is a failure to mobilize every possible ally for the working class. And like that's ultimately what's going on, right? These people claim to simultaneously be building some working class coalition and working with these libertarian groups, these reactionary groups, and appealing to these reactionary constituencies. When really what they're doing is dividing the movement. They're dividing the movement. They're coming down on the wrong and incorrect side of these culture war issues. And ultimately they're wrecking whatever possibility of building a movement, they're wrecking that by throwing these marginalized groups that we should be defending and protecting completely under the bus. And they can't stop crying about service workers. Seriously. I mean, it's the January 6th thing. It's the trucker convoy. It's the anti-trans movement. Like, there's no reactionary movement that they won't try and cozy up to. And again, throwing LGBTQIA people under the bus, women, people that care about social and racial justice, people that care about public health, and support people getting vaccinated, and like supporting like public health measures against a deadly illness. Throwing service workers under the bus, people that work at Starbucks. Like, give me a fucking break. And they, while simultaneously claiming to be the ones that are building this mass movement. You know, it's fucking absurd. It's nonsense. And, you know, to go back to that Sartre quote, from the anti-Semites, right? And how completely ideologically inconsistent it is. And how that's a hallmark of fascism, you know? Engaging in this kind of like rhetorical style, engaging in these reactionary movements, using Marxist language in order to give it this veneer of socialism. You know? These are how fascist movements begin. I just joined a bit. We're talking about Pat socks. Well, we're talking about, LaRoucheites, Pat socks, MAGA communists, libertarians, like whatever you want to call them. It's like they go through a different rebranding every couple of months. Chudcoms. Trying to find maybe just a video I can put on before we kind of shift to what else I wanted to get into. I wanted to talk about Israel and what Israel's doing right now. All I know is that they've eaten up 3 days of my life that I'll never get back. They're the enemy. Well, that's the thing, Len and Smesh. It's like, I think it's important to recognize this movement, even though it's annoying to talk about. I do think, because like this, it does seem like they're having some success organizing around these issues. These aren't just totally marginalized people. Like, they're having some success organizing around these movements. And I think their commitment to just like wrecking a real working class anti-war movement is, if it's not successful, I think they're having some successes in that. So I think we need to be aware of it. We need to be aware of exactly what's going on. As annoying as it is to talk about. It sucks too, because they can turn a switch on and use the correct arguments, especially in some foreign policy discourse. The clip of Dore recently talking about the military-industrial complex rings a bell. Narconas, this is kind of the point of what we've been trying to make, and how I think a lot of whether you want to call that a PSYOP or not, or whatever it is, I do think that's the point, is that it ends up delegitimizing what I would view as a correct foreign policy analysis. And it lumps people that are trying to engage in that kind of foreign policy analysis in with this group of like reactionary conspiratorial wackos. They had like 500 people at their rally, despite nonstop promo from the YouTube crowd. And they were on cable news and shit. I don't know. I don't know what the actual number was. I mean, it seemed like it was like all right. I am really interested to see what the response is in this anti-war protest next month from Answer. Highway to the danger zone. I would just like to take a little break and watch a video. So let's go to the geopolitical economy report, and friend of the stream, Ben Norden. We got a clip here. The West telling the global South, you can't be neutral in the Ukraine war. You're either with us or against us. Let's look at this, and then we can. It sucks that they somehow grabbed Roger Waters' attention. I know it does suck. And we talked about Dennis Kucinich as well, was at that rally. A number of people that should know better, I think, getting pulled into this. That rally definitely had money behind it. Whose money we could find out with some digging. It's an interesting question. I mean, that shit doesn't come cheap. Rolling the AV card into the classroom. That's right. Think about the visualization of "Take My Breath Away" with like the lighting and the curtains and everything. Roger Waters is not immune to psyops. It appears not. Well, that's the thing. I think it's what we're seeing is the difference between people that have a critical foreign policy viewpoint, that you can describe as being anti-imperialist, but not actually having that foundation in socialism and socialist theory. That's the difference between a reactionary anti-imperialism and a correct anti-imperialism that synthesizes all these things. The struggle against imperialism, the struggle to overthrow the endless power and hegemony of these Western powers that stretches back for centuries, liberating the working class in the empire, liberating the global south from being under the thumb of these powerful economic interests, and supporting marginalized groups in our culture that are under assault from state violence, as trans people unquestionably are, and as black and brown and indigenous people unquestionably are. It's the difference between whether your analysis is based in a desire to build socialism. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to build a media brand? Are you trying to build a reactionary movement? Are you trying to build socialism? That's the question. Clearly, Anya and Max from Grey Zone are not interested in socialism at all. And Ben Norden, who we're going to watch now, who left the Grey Zone over these kinds of reactionary stances they were taking, is someone that is interested in socialism. That's the difference.
Is not an option.
As Annalena said, there is no neutral position when it comes to a war of aggression.
You're going to have good old
there is no
to
balance.
talk you through all this. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
The classic Rob bit. The classic Rob bit. Of course. Yeah, I know that I was muted. Okay? Yeah, I know. It's called forcing people to chat and building up engagement, which contributes to the algorithm and puts me directly on the path to the Twitch front page. Okay? And you all fell for my trap. All right? Like sheep. Like sheeple. It was me. It was me, Austin. It was me, Austin. No, but I wanted to respond to where now I can't find it to them. No, I can't find it. This comment from Poison224 saying I'm honestly embarrassed I ever thought they were. And that's the whole point, I think, is that no one should be embarrassed, because I think that's a really effective way of pulling people down these dead ends, these reactionary dead ends. Whether you're talking about Ron Paul in around the Bush era, whether you're talking about Glenn Greenwald during the Obama era, whether you're talking about people like Grey Zone or Jimmy Dore or Max Blumenthal or whoever, they pull people into these reactionary movements because they have that correct analysis. And I think that's you shouldn't be embarrassed about falling for that, because they're very effective at that. That's why, though, I do think it's important to have communities like this one, where you can be sure that that the same thing's not going to happen. That you can still have that viewpoint, which has been difficult. Like when the propaganda machine gets turned on and the war machine gets turned on, like we saw with the Russian-Ukraine thing, it becomes more and more difficult to take these stances. And we need to have spaces where we can have the correct analysis while also not being pulled down this path of reaction and bigotry like what they're doing currently. It is indeed how they get you. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Republicans often do this to Democrats too, where they attack from the left. I'm sure a bunch of Ohio politicians are going to utilize the train derailment as a means to attack public regulation. Exactly. I mean, you have Donald Trump now going into Ohio looking like getting a hero's welcome, despite the fact like that Donald Trump, no one in the conservative movement supports like giving more powers to railway unions. They don't support nationalizing the railway industry. They don't support heavily regulating the industry even more. They want to do it even less. But that's how absurd it is that liberals are so feckless, or intentionally this way, and you might argue, that they give this opportunity to demagogues and reactionaries to come in there and look like heroes. This is what we talked about a lot on this episode of the Insurgents podcast this week, which I recommend folks listen to as well. Anyway, here's this video. I've been talking enough.
Western governments have effectively told the world, you're either with us or you're against us.
You can count on me. You're going to have
the
good
foreign
old
ministers
Rob to
of
talk you through all this.
Hi Rob, hi chat. TRRS Friendship Triangle.
Hello, Ms.
You've
Squatch.
just
Thank
become
you.
an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Thank you, Ms. Squatch. I appreciate that for the 13 months of Tier 1. And thank you very much, Christine, for the 5 gifted subs. Oh my goodness, Christine. So kind of you. Thank you. Wonderful. We love it. Thank you very much for the 5 gifted subs. I really appreciate that. I've been hooting and hollering enough. Let's actually watch this video. I've been talking about putting this on for like 30 minutes, and it's 18 seconds into the video now. That's right. I'm Pedro Pascal. That's correct. I bet you didn't know Pedro Pascal had a Twitch channel. Well, now you do. I'm not just a Hollywood actor. I'm not just on popular HBO and Disney Star Wars shows. I also host this show right here on Twitch, TRRS, which stands for the Pedro Pascal Show. That's right. Yes. The Pedro Pascal Show. TPPS. That's right. When he's not on set, I'm right here on Twitch. That's right. And if you want to support the acting of Pedro Pascal, you can subscribe to this program. The thing is, that's what TRRS stands for, is not anything to do with me. I'm Pedro Pascal, but I'm also a huge proponent of a lifestyle system known as the Rob Reward System, which is what that stands for. I love you on the Mushroom Show and the Little Green Guy Show. Thank you. I appreciate that. Live from the trailer. That's right. One of the Nukes Rob's Twitch channels, him impersonating Pedro Pascal. Wouldn't that be hilarious? Where is Pedro from? His parents are from Chile, I believe. Anyway, here's Benjamin Norton.
United States, Germany, and Ukraine made comments in which they said that the world cannot be neutral over the proxy war in Ukraine.
Yeah, we should send Pedro the clips.
Is telling the global South, you have to join us or you're our enemy. You're with Russia. These were comments that were made at the Munich Security Conference on February 18th. This is a conference that is held every year in Germany, and it brings together Western leaders, including heads of state, but also especially military leaders and corporate leaders and NATO. It's effectively a NATO conference. And there was an event held featuring Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, and the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. The U.S. State Department published an official transcript of this meeting on its website, and you can see here all these 3 foreign ministers criticize neutrality. They say neutrality is not an option. You have to give weapons to Ukraine. There is no neutral position. You really can't be neutral.
Neutrality is not an option.
As Annalena said, there is no neutral position.
I have an article about this over at geopoliticaleconomy.com. I will link to it in the description below, and you can find all of the sources that I discussed today. Now, we should keep in mind here that Germany's foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, is extremely hawkish. She's a neoconservative, and she gave a speech in January at the Council of Europe in which she said, quote, "We are fighting a war against Russia."
We are fighting a war against Russia. We can fight this war only together.
So when the German foreign minister criticizes neutrality, she's saying that you have to join us in this war against Russia. In her comments at the Munich Security Conference, she said neutrality is not an option, and she said that the world has to give ammunition to Ukraine.
Neutrality is not an option, because then you are standing on the side of the aggressor. And this is a plea we are also giving next week to the world again. Please take a side for peace, a side for Ukraine, a side for the humanitarian international law. And these times, this means also delivering ammunition so Ukraine can defend itself.
After Baerbock said that, her comments were repeated by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He said, "There is no neutral position. You cannot be neutral."
As Annalena said, there is no neutral position when it comes to a war of aggression. There is no balance. We're constantly engaged with partners around the world who have different perspectives on this, different ways that they can help. And from our perspective, first of all, again, you really can't be neutral.
And in his response, Antony Blinken was responding to a question from a journalist from Saudi Arabia. And he said that Saudi Arabia has taken a semi-neutral position. We did not support the invasion. They condemned the Russian invasion, but we decided not to cut relations with Russia or China. That has been the position of the vast majority of countries on Earth which are in the global South. I'll come back to that point in a bit here. The most disgusting comment, which was just blatantly, honestly racist, came from the Ukrainian foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, and he said that we've seen an unprecedented unity on one part of the world that stands for principles and rules. So he's saying the West. He's saying that the West stands for principles and rules, whereas the global South are apparently, according to the Ukrainian foreign minister, barbarians and are lawless. And he said, in other parts of the world, he's referring to the global South, which is the vast majority of the global population, over 6 billion people. He says some of them are neutral, which means effectively the support
chauvinism.
Yes, we see an unprecedented unity of one part of the world that stands for principles and rules this world is.
You're not going to be part of the rules-based international order. This is the pathetic thing. You know, these Ukrainians that think, oh, we're being integrated into the whole like European Western economic system, you know? And not, we're being relentlessly exploited by these people. We're part of the club. We're leaving Russia and we're going to be part of the rules-based international order. We're going to be part of the special club. And Russia's going to be considered part of Asia, and we're going to be considered part of Europe. And we're going to share in the spoils of empire. They're literally taking the spoils of empire from you right now at this very moment. That's the sad thing.
But we also see other parts of the world. Some are neutral, which means effectively, the support of Russia. Some are calling on to seize the supply of weapons to Ukraine, which also means that Russia is going to win.
Now, the Joe Biden administration loves to talk about multilateralism and the rules-based order and all of this, discursive propaganda that they're not actually committed to. But the reality is that their ideology, their unipolar, hegemonic, imperialist ideology, is the same as that of George W. Bush, who famously said, "You're either with us or you're against us. You're with us or you're with the terrorists."
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make.
Seriously, old Dutch.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
It's sad and depressing that people lap this shit up. And again, this is the issue, is the people that are not lapping it up are leading people into this reactionary libertarian movement rather than leading down the correct path of, dialectical analysis and anti-imperialism. Hey, Sunny Solo, what's up? If Ukraine gets into EU, every job from France to Czech will move to Ukraine where people will get poverty wages. Of course, because they're destroying all labor protections that exist right now. Right? While jailing anyone even remotely on the left and locking up anyone that they can call a Russian sympathizer. This will lead to a far-right government elected in every EU country. Not only that, but the massively higher energy prices that all these EU countries are going to be paying as a result of picking the Western side in this conflict. All of this is just going to empower the far right throughout the whole world.
So when Antony Blinken says the world can't be neutral, that's the exact same ideology. And he might couch it in the rhetoric of multilateralism and the rules-based international order. But really they just mean the US-based, the US-led, the US-controlled international order of U.S. unipolar imperialist hegemony controlling the planet. And there's actually no substantial difference between George Bush's ideology and Antony Blinken's ideology. The only difference is
we make the rules of the order, no free will, but we also get to determine who gets to follow these rules and who doesn't have to. Who do we apply these rules to and who do we not? As we're going to see in the contrast we're going to take a look at after this clip, we're going to see what our steadfast, ironclad ally in this rules-based international order, Israel, is doing right now. Bombing Syria after they've been the victim of this brutal earthquake while they're still rebuilding from that, not even in beginning the process of rebuilding, bombing Syria, executing 10 more Palestinians today in the open air prison in Gaza. This is what our allies in the rules-based international order are doing, because we don't actually care. These things about foreign human rights and democracy and sovereignty and all this bullshit that we love to lecture everyone about don't actually apply to us or our friends, only to people that aren't part of this exclusive little club.
That George Bush was a very bad public speaker and said things that were often very dumb. This is a map of countries around the world that have imposed sanctions on Russia over the war in Ukraine. They represent 13% of the global population. That is, 87% of the global population has not joined in these sanctions on Russia. And this is what the U.S. refers to.
There's the rules-based international order. All
the
the
US,
all
Canada,
the
Europe, Australia,
colonial countries,
South Korea, and Japan. And of course, South Korea and Japan have been militarily occupied by the U.S. since the 1940s or 50s. They represent slightly over 1 billion people out of a planet of 8 billion people. And according to Ukraine's foreign minister, Kuleba, these are the only countries on earth that supposedly respect principles and rules.
Always the same map.
All the global south are just barbarians. I mean, this is the blatant kind of racism that is behind this Western rhetoric saying you're either with us or you're against us. Now, I've been constantly repeating this for a year, ever since Russia invaded in February 2022. I've pointed out in report after report that the vast majority of the world population lives in the global south, and they have been neutral in this proxy war. The US and Europe have been trying to pressure countries in Latin America to send weapons to Ukraine, and all of them have refused to do so. Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, they're all neutral. And in fact, one day before this meeting was held at the Munich Security Conference, French state media, France 24, French state propaganda, they published an article criticizing the Global South, condemning the Global South for being neutral. It's titled Ukraine War Exposes Splits Between Global North and South. And they wrote, quote, over the past year, most Global South countries adopted a position of studied neutrality on the war in Ukraine. And then they proceed to constantly criticize the Global South, not so neutral and all of this. And this French state propaganda in particular criticized the Global South for calling for a multipolar world. It wrote, quote, what binds this diverse group together is the quest for a multipolar world stacked against the unipolar hegemony of the West. And of course, they wrote unipolar hegemony in scare quotes. And they said, it also happens to be Russia's favorite talking point. So this is the response of French state propaganda to the Global South demanding equality, demanding independence, demanding multipolarity. They say, you're all dumb. You all don't actually respect international law. We are superior to you. That is the West's response. It is racism and it is neo-colonialist. There are about 8 billion people on the planet, and over 6 billion people live in countries that are neutral, that refuse to take the West side in this proxy war.
Even our allies.
I made a list here, and this is
even our more allied countries such as India, or Indonesia, where the CIA spent decades fucking targeting and purging and ensuring that anyone with remotely leftist sympathies or remotely internationalist sympathies were murdered. That's the amazing thing. And I think the biggest signal of all that this big shift is underway, that the United States empire is on the collapse, is the fact that these countries that have in many ways been subservient to U.S. empire still have not backed them on this, because they still see the writing on the wall of where things are going.
In the sources in the article below at geopoliticaleconomy.com. Let me name some of the countries, just some of them, because I'm not going to spend all day here naming the vast majority of countries on Earth. Here are some of the countries and their populations that are neutral in the proxy war in Ukraine. China, 1.4 billion people. India, 1.4 billion people. Indonesia, 276 million people. The three of those countries together have 3 billion people, and they're all neutral. Pakistan, over 200 million. Nigeria, over 200 million. Brazil, Bangladesh, 200 million, 170 million. Mexico, 130 million. Ethiopia, over 100 million. Egypt, over 100 million. Vietnam, 100 million. Iran, 86 million. Even Turkey, formerly known as Turkey, which is a member of NATO, 85 million. Thailand, 67 million. Tanzania, South Africa, Kenya, Argentina, Algeria, Sudan, Uganda, Iraq. The list goes on and on. They represent more than 6 billion people on Earth, and they are neutral in this proxy war in Ukraine. And yet, the West, which represents only around 1 billion people, claims to speak on behalf of the global population and is telling the rest of the world, you're either with us or you're against us. If you don't support this war, you're an enemy. You're a terrorist. This is the Western racist neo-colonialist ideology. And this is why in Russia refers to this as the golden billion. This is the 1 billion population represented by these countries that are the imperialist countries that became rich through colonial conquest, through stealing the wealth of the global South, through colonialism, through exploitation,
yeah,
cheap labor of workers in the global South, through slavery, through war. And this 1 billion population of countries in the global North thinks that the other 7 billion in the vast majority of the rest of the planet are barbarians, and they don't follow principles and rules, as Ukraine's foreign minister said. This inconvenient fact was actually admitted by 2 former U.S. diplomats. They're not current U.S. diplomats, 2 former U.S. diplomats who admitted that 87% of the global population is in countries that do not support the West's new Cold War on Russia and also China. Here's the article in Newsweek published back in September by former U.S. diplomats Michael Gefoller and David Rundle. It's titled, Nearly 90% of the world.
I should try and talk to Ben about this gray zone shit and this whole
87%
thing that we've been talking about today, this reactionary turn. I don't know how much he'd be willing to talk about it, but
sanctions have united our adversaries in
I would certainly be very interested to have that discussion with him.
Less predictably, the outbreak of Cold War II has also led countries that were once partners or non-aligned to become increasingly multi-aligned. Now, they're former diplomats because they wouldn't be allowed to say this if they were still U.S. diplomats, because the U.S. State Department is against the vast majority of the planet. Britain's elite newspaper, The Guardian, admitted this also in March 2022 in an article that was angrily criticizing Africa because the vast majority of countries in Africa, almost all of them, have been neutral.
Dr. Maggot, did you check the couch cushions? And not just a lazy hand in the couch cushion. Did you take the couch cushions off and check in there? I'm waiting on your response. The car too is a good suggestion. I did, but I have to do that in the car. That's a good idea. Sometimes it falls in. I wear jogging pants and it falls out of my pocket in the car when I sit down. Gets lost under the seat. I don't know if you'd want to burn a professional on resume bridge live on air for our entertainment. Well, I wouldn't want that either, Lodane, but I just mean it seems a little bit like that bridge has already been damaged from the other side, because he didn't want to be part of their kind of reactionary thing. And, that kind of breakup happened. So I don't even know if it still is a bridge. Check your mouth. It could be in your mouth. Just walking around with a big vape hanging out of your mouth. And we hope you find it. If you looked in the sofa and it's not there, I'm going to have to go with it's got to be car. It's got to be car. When I wear my sweats, I put my vape halfway in my underwear so it doesn't fall out. You got to make sure it's in it's horizontal, right? Remember when the Pat Sox Lerushites came for Ben and Danny? Yeah, I do. So I don't know if he would be opposed to talking about it or not. Maybe even just talking about it without naming names, but talking about this general phenomenon. I don't know. I would be very interested to hear his viewpoint on it, that's for sure.
In the proxy war in Ukraine. The article is titled Cold War Echoes as African Leaders Resist Criticizing Putin's War. That's actually not entirely true. Many of them have criticized the war, which I'll get to in a second, but they're neutral. They refuse to take the West side.
Speaking of.
And the West says that if you're not with us, you're against us. And they say that the Guardian complains that many African leaders, quote, remember Moscow's support for liberation from colonial rule and a strong anti-imperialist feeling remains. And when they say Moscow, they mean, of course, the former Soviet Union specifically, that helped fight against colonialism and oppose apartheid. The Guardian notes that many countries on the African continent have called for peace, but blamed NATO's eastward expansion for the war, which is objectively the cause of it. Even former U.S. ambassador in Russia.
The funniest was that Rania Khalek interview we watched, and I was happy to be able to ask Rania about this when after it happened. But when she interviewed talking about Africa and these global South nations being non-aligned or being independent on this, when she interviewed that spokesperson from the youth wing of the ANC, that was just like kind of super pro-Russia, taking the pro-Russian stance to the point that even Rania was like, whoa, we need to maybe tone down on this just ever so slightly. That was very funny. But I think it was also really indicative about the way that people in these global South countries that have been victimized by this golden billion and been victimized by the colonialist countries view this conflict, and they understand who has the power in the situation and who doesn't. That was very funny.
current CIA director William Burns, admitted back in 2008. He wrote an embassy cable that we have thanks to WikiLeaks, in which he said that if NATO expanded to Ukraine, it would create a civil war that would force Russia to intervene. And The Guardian points out that many African countries are complaining of Western double standards. They put that in scare quotes, of course, and resisting calls to criticize Russia.
There's over 46 various forms of U.S. military bases in Africa via AFRICOM. But the thing, though, Lever Action Radical, though, is that even though that might be true, that there is 46 various forms of U.S. military bases in Africa via AFRICOM. Well, at the same time, though, you have China coming in there and making trade deals with Africa and building like roads and ports and bridges and hospitals and water filtration units and schools in exchange for access to the resources. So really, that's the same thing, right? Really, it's the exact same thing. As we get told by our friends in the anarchist movement or the social democrat movement. They're just doing Chinese imperialism, just like the Soviet Union was doing imperialism by like trying to build socialism. I'm a socialist, but when the Soviet Union tries to build socialism or when China tries to build socialism, it's not good. Anyway. Always funny when people complain about that. It was in the car, Dr. Maggot, amazing. It was in the car and you did correctly assume that I'm wearing sweats, joggers. Thank you, Father Rib. It's my pleasure, Dr. Maggot. It's my pleasure. I'm glad you found it. We're back in business. The CIA did not say that the anarchists are the weakest and most susceptible group to co-opt on the left for no reason. That's exactly right. Imperialism is trade. Yeah, it's when you make trade deals with your friends. That's right.
And almost all countries on the African continent are members of the non-aligned movement. This is a map showing countries in the world that are part of the non-aligned
Sweats are standard
movement.
issue for TRRS viewing. I am wearing jeans today. Although they're like a stretchy jean. I've got like stretchy jeans on, which I really enjoy stretchy jeans. Which is still kind of it's not a sweat. I've been wearing sweatpants, I don't know, the last probably as far back as I can remember, the last couple of days, but I am wearing jeans today. I tried to have like a fit. But you're right that it is standard issue, standard viewing. I've actually been wearing like a almost unofficial like TRRS sweatsuits lately because I have a pair of black sweatpants with a stripe. I have a pair of blue sweatpants with a stripe and gray with a stripe. So I matched those with the gray TRRS hoodie or the black one or the blue one to have official TRRS jumpsuits. And this is, I hope that we can take this to the next level. When we start watching this, we get our official TRRS jumpsuits on. Basketball shorts are definitely high tier at home clothing. I just like to stay in the winter. I like to stay. I don't want to do the shorts. I am a big basketball shorts fan, although, as we all know, I've now switched to the 4-inch inseams. I'm not really doing basketball shorts anymore as much. I'm now going with those. Anyway, let's continue this video before we get too sidetracked here. Marty knows what I'm talking about.
Member states, the light blue countries are observers of the non-aligned movement, and it's basically all the global south. And the West has been waging war on the non-aligned movement ever since it was founded in 1961. This is a photo showing the founders of the non-aligned movement. All of them were socialists, were leftists, which is why the West, the imperialist capitalist West, has always opposed them and organized coups against them and tried to assassinate them. And
the world that could have been.
Nehru,
if this anti-colonial non-aligned movement had just been allowed to progress naturally, the world that we could be living in now is just so fascinating and heartbreaking to think about, isn't it? There was so much. There was like a beauty in that moment after the war when there was this possibility for this non-aligned anti-colonial movement emerging in the global south. It's just heartbreaking to think about how that was just so ruthlessly destroyed, ruthlessly crushed with brutal violence on the part of the Americans, who are now still to this day lecturing people about sovereignty and human rights. It's just a preposterous joke.
Father of India, who led independence against British colonialism. You have Kwame Nkrumah, the socialist founding father of Ghana, who led the anti-colonial liberation struggle. He was a socialist, and he was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup in 1966. You have Egypt's socialist leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was also
Lumumba could be part of this conversation as well.
Coup attempts and regime change, assassination attempts, and they failed. They ultimately failed. And then you also have Tito, who was the socialist leader of socialist Yugoslavia.
Tito.
And finally, you have Sukarno, who was the socialist leader of Indonesia, and he was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup in 1965. And then the U.S. backed a fascist dictator, Suharto, who committed genocide. In 1965 and 1966, he murdered between 1 million and 3 million leftists, communists, labor organizers. Anyone who had a left-wing bone in their body was assassinated by this fascist dictatorship backed by the U.S. And
sickening.
Sukarno had been a popular socialist leader who was very popular in Indonesia, and he was one of the co-founders of the non-aligned movement. So, I mean, the West has been waging war against the non-aligned movement since day one, and they're still doing it today. And that's why they're saying you cannot be neutral. You have to be our colonies. You have to be our slaves. That's what the global North is saying to the global South. You have to follow our orders, or you're our enemy. As George Bush said, you're either with us or you're a terrorist. Ironically, Ukraine itself had been an observer state of the non-aligned movement. And Ukraine back in 2010 officially said that its government was non-aligned. But that was under the democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was independent. He was not simply a Western puppet. And that's why in February of 2014, the US sponsored a violent coup d'etat in Ukraine that overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, and installed a Western puppet regime. And then soon after the coup, in 2014, Ukraine officially voted to end its non-aligned status. And then Ukraine announced that it was going to join NATO. So this explains why we're in the situation we're in today. It's because of Western aggression, constantly expanding NATO right up in Russia's borders. And Ukraine had been a neutral state geopolitically, and that neutrality ended in 2014 with a US-sponsored coup, which set off this civil war.
That's just factual. That's factual. I'm sorry if people still don't want to accept that, or don't want to try and obfuscate or ignore America's role in that. I'm sorry, but it's just preposterous.
Now CIA director. Again,
it was a coup.
He wrote in a 2008
It was a color revolution, CIA sponsored.
That we have thanks to WikiLeaks. He said, quote, that if Ukraine joins NATO, quote, this includes fears that the issue could potentially split the country into, leading to violence or even some claims.
Yeah, of course they're trying to erase it. Squatch. They suggest that it's Kremlin propaganda to even mention that.
This is exactly 100% what happened. And the U.S. ambassador to Russia, current CIA director William Burns, admitted it back in February 2008, years before the U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine in 2014. So this is the reality of the war in Ukraine. The West is isolated. They keep saying that Russia is isolated. The West is isolated. They are trying to wage war to maintain their unipolar imperialist hegemony, which French state media puts in scare quotes as if it's an imaginary conspiracy theory created by the Kremlin. Now, finally, I do want to conclude.
It's Kremlin propaganda to suggest that America is the imperialist country in the world.
Every global South country that is neutral is secretly, a Putin puppet. That is also ridiculous. Many countries in the global South did condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which did violate international law. These are countries that have been victims of invasions by the West, like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the Libya War, the Syria War, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, Western colonialism all across the world, British colonialism, German colonialism.
Yesterday on the Dan Simpson show, we watched a bunch of Democracy Now! Clips from January, February 2014. Fascinating stuff. Amy Goodman had made a lot more back before the narrative was set up. I mean, it wasn't even fucking Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman and like progressive media. There was tons of mainstream reporting about what was going on in Ukraine. All the same, like literally there's like mainstream reporting from Democracy Now! To the Ottawa Citizen, all across mainstream media that now today would be framed as like gray zone style Kremlin propaganda. Like, it's remarkable. And people just like the switch flips in their mind when the propaganda hose gets turned on and all that just gets erased. It's bizarre, honestly. That's been the most bizarre and disorienting and confusing things about the last year, is seeing the way that people that ostensibly understand this basic history, this basic factual information, just completely reject it as soon as it becomes inconvenient to the narrative that's being promoted. It's fucked up, seriously. And seeing people that you thought you knew or you thought knew better being pulled into it. It's very scary when you see this happening. And this is the thing that I've been trying to warn about as well. We saw that, even though one interesting thing that's happening is that the popularity of this conflict is like waning. And they're having a harder and harder time selling it to Americans. I think that's kind of fascinating. But in the first couple of weeks of it, it was very, very effective, definitely. And as I've been saying repeatedly, like that's the thing that we need to be really wary of when this stuff kicks into high gear next time. Being aware of that. Because if we thought the Russia-Ukraine thing was something, when it kicks off in Taiwan eventually, it's going to be it's going to make that look like a kid's child's play toy. I don't know. What the fuck am I saying? What's that analogy? You know, it's going to make it seem like child's play in comparison. Really struggled to put that one together. But that's what we have to be aware of when this stuff kicks off again. It's going to be, if we thought it was difficult to oppose the Russia-Ukraine stuff when it was going on, and again, it wasn't always easy for me. I had people calling me a Kremlin apologist and a genocide supporter, and I've had people say all kinds of fucked up things about me. I support fascism. I support civilians being killed, you know, but when it kicks off again, it's going to be even more intense, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to we have to harden our hearts, and we have to not be swayed by this, and not change our analysis just because it gets to be difficult. I'm still optimistic on the peaceful reunification of Taiwan. I just don't think the West is going to let it happen. Even if there's appetite for that for people who live on Taiwan, the West is just not going to accept. That's not an acceptable outcome for them. Media overload is real. That's why the CNN made the change to 24/7 news cycle during the first Iraq War. It served as an excellent function to distill the war under the U.S.-centered narrative. Yeah, I mean, it's so fucking insidious. And when you see these powerful forces playing out as well. No, the U.S. will never remove military bases from Korea and Japan and Taiwan. Never. No matter how much, because it's not like people in these countries all uniformly want America there. People in Okinawa don't want U.S. military bases on their island. These fucking imperialist U.S. soldiers running around getting in auto accidents and committing sexual assaults and with zero repercussions. You know, there's anti-war and anti-Western movements in all these places. The U.S. is not going to pull out, no matter how much people in South Korea ask them to, or no matter how much people in Okinawa or Taiwan or anywhere else ask them to. They're not going to move their bases from the continent of Africa either, no. The propaganda is so ludicrous that they need to repeat it 24/7 or else the hypnosis begins to fade. That's it. Yeah, it's true. People start coming out of it.
Dutch colonialism, French colonialism. I mean, they understand what it's like being a victim of these wars, but they also understand that the West bears responsibility for starting this war with the coup in Ukraine, with NATO expansion. And if you look at the UN votes, The Global South has been consistent. In March 2022, many Global South countries did vote to either condemn the Russian invasion or they abstained. That is true. Now, there were a few countries that voted against the resolution, including Syria, the DPRK, Eritrea, Belarus, but many countries in the Global South were neutral, including Algeria, Angola, Armenia, Bangladesh, Burundi, Central African Republic, China, Congo, Cuba, El Salvador, Equatorial Guinea, India, Iran, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Madagascar, Mali, Mongolia, Mozambique, Namibia, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Senegal, South Africa, South Sudan, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Tajikistan, Uganda, Tanzania, Vietnam.
In Cry Korea, the book, U.S. soldiers treated Koreans from both sides like animals, Canadian soldiers as well. There was a number of high-profile cases of Canadian soldiers committing brutal sexual assaults and murders in South Korea, like during that conflict that we participated in. Also, in regards to Taiwan, Marcus pointed this out the other day. The U.S. has a specially classified airspace over Taiwan going over into or exceptionally close to mainland. That is all Chinese airspace, presumably to avoid saying officially that they fly in Chinese airspace. Well, and that's what they always like criticize China as well for like flying over in Taiwan airspace or whatever when they're literally, or close to it, when they're literally just flying over their own territory. You know, it's amazing how this shit gets framed. China has already won regarding Taiwan. They'll do what they did after Pelosi's visit. Naval and air blockade, open humanitarian corridor to the mainland, and dare the West to attack. Well, that's the thing. I think they've made clear that they're not going to rise to the provocations. I talked about this with Vijay Prashad a couple weeks ago, right? But I don't think we'll ever see the West just attack. But I think if that's the case, if they don't take the bait in the same way that kind of Russia has given them the war that they were kind of asking for in Ukraine, if they don't take the bait, though, we'll see some kind of like Gulf of Tonkin or USS Cole. They always go to the ships. That Operation Northwoods thing. They always go to one of their ships. Will get damaged or sunk or attacked mysteriously, and then that'll be the kickoff that they need. You know, because they can never just come out and attack these places that they. Remember the Maine? That's right. It's the same fucking thing every time. The U.S. economy can't support a war like that, though. Well, that seems to be the inherent contradiction that's coming down the pike. And who knows what the result of that's going to be. You know? It just seems like, as I've been talking about, I don't want this to be true, but it just seems like the conflict is inevitable. It seems like the World War III stuff is just inevitable because the U.S. is not going to allow this shift from the unipolar imperialist hegemony that Ben's talking about in this clip. They're not going to allow this shift from that to this new multilateral system. They're just not going to allow that to happen. So the question is like what's going to be the spark, or whether the spark has already happened. That's more the question, is about whether or not it's going to happen or not. Yeah, the last Hail Mary of a collapsing empire. And I don't want that to happen. It's going to be a fucking historic calamity that I don't know if we'll ever even recover from. So to be 100% clear about that, that's not something that I hope for, that I'm trying to fetishize. I do think, though, if it is just an inevitability, the revolutionary sort of optimism we have to have about it is that, as Mao indicated when he wrote about World War III, that that world socialism will emerge after that conflict, just like the USSR emerged out of World War I. Socialist China emerged out of World War II, and the rest of the socialist global South movements. And what we'll see out of World War III will be the final victory of socialism. Inshallah. And it's not going to be easy or fun to get to that point. And who knows if any of us will live to see it. Probably not, if we're being honest with ourselves. But that is what I try to hold on to when we talk about these things.
Vietnam and Zimbabwe. They all abstained. So again, that doesn't mean that they're supporting the Russian invasion. Some of these countries in the global south condemn the Russian invasion. Some of them they abstained, which is neutrality. That's what neutrality is. Then there was an even more revealing vote in April in which the United Nations General Assembly voted on whether or not to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. And you can look at a map here, and most of the countries that voted to condemn, to expel Russia from this Human Rights Council were Western countries. There were a few countries in the global south, especially a few countries in Africa, like Libya, which had its country destroyed by NATO in 2011. You also had Colombia and Argentina and Chile. So, but still many countries in the global south abstained. Brazil abstained. Mexico abstained. Bolivia voted against it. India abstained. Saudi Arabia abstained. South Africa abstained. China voted against it. So again, this idea that the global south is simply all Putin puppets, it's not true. Some countries in the global south have voted to condemn Russia, but they're still neutral. Argentina voted to condemn Russia, but Argentina is still neutral. India has repeatedly abstained, and India is neutral. India has very negative relations with China and
with all we've done for KSA. And again, that should be an indication of the shift that's happening right now over everything else.
And on Ukraine, Turkey, a member of NATO, I mean, they did vote to condemn Russia at the UN, but Turkey has tried to sponsor peace talks. So again, this Western narrative that the global south are all just Putin puppets because they won't follow Western orders reflects this racist neo-colonialist mentality that you're either with us or you're against us, you're with us or you're a terrorist. When the US, Germany, and Ukraine, when their foreign ministers tell the world, tell the global south, you cannot be neutral. Neutrality is not an option. It's very clear what they're saying. You need to subordinate yourselves to us. You have to go back to being our colonies. You are not intelligent enough to have your own independent foreign policy. You don't, as the foreign minister of Ukraine, Kuleba, claimed, you don't believe in rules and principles. We are the ones who make the rules. It's our rules-based order, and you have to follow it. That's what they're saying. What they're saying is that colonialism did not end. They're trying to bring it back.
This is
That was a great clip from Ben. I would like to just grab that video.
Neutrality is not an option.
As Annalena said,
this is democracy.
Again, I really appreciate the work that Ben does on this. Please make sure you give him a follow as well. This seems like a decent clip to look at now while we're talking about this rules-based concept of the rules-based order and who's in it and who's not, and this colonial mentality. You know, and then another aspect of that is, you know, this constant process of provoking these countries, whether it's China or Russia, and then claiming that they're the aggressive country when they respond to the provocations. And as we've talked about with the whole Russia and Ukraine war, it doesn't mean that you need to support the invasion or that you think that war is a good thing. You know, if we're anti-war, we're against the war I don't think it should have been provoked in the first place. I don't think it should have happened, and I want it to stop now. That's my position as like an anti-war person. But the thing we need to understand, whether it's about Ukraine or Taiwan, but like focusing on Ukraine, this idea that it's this unprovoked illegal invasion, or whatever the phrase is that we hear constantly about this. This is the reality. And this is what folks like John Mearsheimer were saying years ago. This is why we found his analysis, I think, really important, and it helps us understand this kind of conflict, despite him not really being someone that's on the left or a socialist or anything like that. This is the reality. Russia had a red line, okay? And since for the last 10 years, we've been pushing up against that red line over and over and over and over and over. You had people warning them, if you expand NATO up to their borders, there's going to be consequence. If you're fucking around in Ukraine and arming proxies in Ukraine to kill Russians in eastern Ukraine, it's crossing that red line. If you try to pull Ukraine into this rules-based order that you love to talk about, if you want to park missiles in Ukraine, which is what them being part of NATO would involve, that's crossing their red line. So that's the fucked up thing about the way this discourse has gone, is that like people have been saying for years now that you're crossing their red line. It's going to lead to a consequence. It's going to lead to a reaction. You had people across the political spectrum for years saying this. We have to stop provoking them. We have to stop crossing this red line. We refused to do it. We just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And then when this invasion happens, which is terrible, which is a calamity, which is a fucking disaster, but when it happens, we say, "Oh, Russia's so aggressive." You know, this is the thing that I've rejected from moment one. Just this complete refusal to acknowledge our role in provoking this exact situation, despite the warnings of all these various people that were telling them exactly what they were doing and what that behavior was going to lead to. You know, it doesn't excuse any violence or terrible things that happens in a war, but it means that we're responsible for the violence. And we have to stop it through this negotiation process. Rib, you don't understand the United States is the only country that can create red lines. This is the rules-based order, while the protecting capital as well as the capitalist class. That's right. They're not allowed to establish a red line. Like for Taiwan is another example. Even though China has repeatedly said, stop arming Taiwan, stop encouraging this separatist mentality, don't visit Taiwan, stop violating the One China principle, and the United States just repeatedly does it. It keeps repeatedly doing the exact same thing.
Member of the Friendship Triangle.
Lennon Smesh, thank you very much. Look at that. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs, Lennon Smesh. Rub-a-dub-dub, rib debating in a tub. I told you, folks, that's going to be 1,000 subs. Then we'll talk about that. Thank you again, Lennon Smesh. It is abuser logic, though. Like continually violating their sovereignty. Continually, like going directly engaging in behavior which they're very clearly indicating they view as a provocation, and then when there's a response, you say that they're being aggressive or they're being provocative. Like, it's just fucking nonsense. And this is when you run the rules-based international order, this global international criminal cartel. This is what you're allowed to do, right? When you make the rules and you decide who breaks the rules and who doesn't, you can just endlessly provoke anyone and then cry about human rights and democracy and sovereignty when your actions directly provoke a response. Do you think North Korea, with all these testings, bring everyone on the negotiating table? No, I don't really, because when Donald Trump, one of the only fucking good things he did, and from a foreign policy standpoint, was trying to normalize relations with the U.S. and North Korea and trying to kind of hammer out some kind of peace deal, even if it was for totally cynical and dumb reasons, people freak the fuck out. People use that to criticize Trump from the right on that issue. So no, I don't think there's going to be any process where because it's the same. North Korea is the same thing. Why is North Korea so provocatively and aggressively spending money on their military? Why are they so provocatively and aggressively doing these missile tests while the yearly war games that we are doing directly on the border that we created, by the way, we fucking arbitrarily created this division and this border, carrying out war games every year where we stimulate the invasion of their country, the last of which invasion killed 3 million fucking people and devastated the entire country. But that doesn't count as being provocative, though. That's us we're defensively doing those drills, and they're provocatively testing missiles, which they view correctly as being a impediment to being invaded and mass murdered again. But while we're talking about this concept of, accusing other countries of being aggressive while constantly and deliberately provoking them, you can talk about the red lines in Russia and Ukraine, or you can talk about the way that China is militarily encircled by U.S. military bases, like we were saying, in South Korea, in the Philippines, in Japan, in Taiwan. And yet we constantly say, oh, China's being so provocative with their activity in the South China Sea. They're being so provocative with their trade deals they're making with Africa and Latin America. Like, it's just an absurdly farcical way of looking at the world. And like Ben said, it's part of this racist, this neo-colonialist attitude, which is designed to preserve this imperialist hegemony over the unipolar imperialist hegemony over the entire world. It looks like we do have a DPRK understander. We always like to see new DPRK understanders emerge in the chat.
Now, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As we continue to look at U.S.-China relations, we turn to the growing U.S. military presence in the Pacific. The Biden administration recently reached an agreement with the Philippines to give the United States access to 4 more military bases in the former.
The U.S. points to international laws. Sorry, Heroic Skeleton, just getting to this one. The U.S. points to international laws that they themselves refuse to sign, but they're perfectly happy to enforce over everyone else. A fucking great example of that is the Iran deal, right? Which Iran signed in good faith and America broke in extremely bad faith. And then when Iran says, okay, well, I guess we're not in the deal anymore, so we're not going to act according to the deal anymore. And then America says, what are they violating? They're violating the Iran deal. What are they doing? It's so preposterous. Like, I don't even understand how people believe this. You know, it's fucking ridiculous.
Or U.S. colony. This will allow the U.S. greater access to the South China Sea and Taiwan as tensions rise between Washington and Beijing. The deal was announced after Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in Manila. We're joined now by David Vine, professor of anthropology at American University, co-founder of the Overseas Base Realignment and Closure Coalition.
And do you know what I'm concerned about? I think when we're talking about like World War III and this kind of when that's going to kick off, what I think is going to happen is when it gets to the next presidential election in the United States, you're going to have all these conservative groups using these foreign policy issues as a way to suggest that Republicans are going to be better on this issue, and they're going to pull back away from China, and that they're going to pull back from supporting Ukraine, and we're voting for Republicans while simultaneously throwing all those like marginalized groups that they're targeting constantly under the bus is going to be the way to avoid this conflict. That's the argument that the gray zone types and the LaRouchites are going to be making at that next election. But like we saw with George W. Bush, even if there are conservatives that are running on that kind of a platform, a more isolationist platform, or criticizing the security state from that position, whether it's Trump or anyone else, when it comes down to it, they'll gladly be the ones to pull the trigger on this shit themselves. Like we saw with George W. Bush, who was making a lot of the same cases that we shouldn't be policing the world. He was making all those same cases against Gore, saying like, no, we should pull back from these things, and then oversees this drastic increase in the war on terror and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and in kicking that nightmarish 20-year war off. So that's the whole thing, is that people are going to be making this case about conservatives that they're going to be better on these foreign policy issues. There's no evidence to suggest that even if they might rhetorically use some of this language to criticize the state, that they won't wield the exact same power in even more destructive ways. So that's going to be totally, that's going to be something we're going to have to pay attention to from these exact people that we've been kind of focusing on today. Yeah, if you think MTG is your ally because she'll use this kind of language, just how fucking dumb can you be?
His books include Base Nation, How U.S. Military Bases Abroad Harm America and the World. Welcome to Democracy Now! I mean, this is right in line with what you write about, Base Nation. Talk about that image of Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, standing with the new president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos' son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., announcing more U.S. military bases in the Philippines, Japan being increasingly militarized. What's happening?
I mean, the amazing thing, sorry to keep interrupting this clip. That's actually a funny pause face as well. But just really the amazing thing the other day was when we were focusing on that Chinese spy balloon coverage, and we watched that clip from, I think it was Sky News, and that guy talking about talking about this exact process of accusing China of being belligerent or aggressive while they themselves are encircled militarily. And talking about the illegal military bases that they were building in the South China Sea, and then literally in the same breath, literally in the same sentence, in the same breath, saying like, oh, by the way, in the Philippines, they're building 4 new military bases as well, which they just view as being totally okay, totally normal, totally acceptable, not hostile, not aggressive. And it's really incredible the way that they're able to to hold these ideas in their minds at the same time, simultaneously, even in the same thought, the same sentence.
Happening in the South China Sea.
This is precisely what we don't need. Let me first say happy Valentine's Day, happy V-Day, Amy and Juan. It's a pleasure to be with you. But that image of Lloyd Austin announcing the deployment of U.S. forces to 4 new bases, in addition to 5 U.S. bases where U.S. troops are deployed.
Why do they put their country so close to those U.S. military bases?
9,
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness gracious. Ellie Fried Comrade, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. That's very, very kind of you. Thank you. I was so stunned I didn't even do the little dance. Sometimes I do the corresponding dance and I was completely stunned by your generosity. Thank you very much. The U.S. is like, we're just going to have some bases right next to you. Just don't worry about it. Exactly. They're defensive bases. They're rules following defensive democracy bases.
That's precisely the wrong image and precisely the wrong direction that the U.S. should be going
It's preposterous and childish that people believe
the Biden
this.
Administration and a larger foreign policy elite, I'm sad to say, has hijacked our foreign policy and is currently escalating military tensions with China at precisely the moment we need to be moving in the other direction. We need to be drawing down U.S. military bases and forces in the region while building up our diplomatic presence. There actually is a good sign in recent days. I will give the Biden administration some credit for opening a new embassy in the Solomon Islands. This is in the context of a security deal between the Solomon Islands and China announced in the last
Illegal.
year or so.
Not allowed.
The United States could have responded militarily. I'm glad that they didn't and instead opened a new embassy and are sending additional diplomats. And this is the approach we need to take. I think actually the balloon incident offers a rare opportunity for us to consider a really hard and stark question. And that is, do we want a war with China? I think the people of the United States absolutely do not want war. They are sick of war, sick and tired of war after 21 years of war launched by the George W. Bush administration with its war on terror, the catastrophes in Afghanistan and Iraq following prior catastrophes.
This is exactly what I mean. Like, I like when it comes to the next election, people are going to be saying, "Look at Tucker Carlson. Look at all these conservatives making these anti-war comments." Like Tucker Carlson won't flip on a fucking dime the moment the button gets pressed to turn on the propaganda hose to gin up support for this massive conflict. That the Tucker Carlsons of the world won't be right on leading the way on that. They won't completely abandon whatever principles you might think they have the moment this starts. Like, how stupid and how much of a fucking mark do you have to be to believe that?
To the war in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, we need to move in another direction. And I think we're better than the current approach that the Biden administration and this foreign policy blob, a group of elites that have dominated U.S. foreign policy for far too long, they have led us down the wrong path, and we need to push back on our leaders to choose a different path, a path of peaceful, if challenging, coexistence with China, cooperation on the real threats that face us, and moving in and doing everything we can, doing everything we can to reduce military tensions, which most frighteningly of all, raise the real risk of a direct military confrontation and war between the United States and China that could so easily spin completely out of control into a nuclear war that could literally threaten human existence on Earth.
Well, David Vine, you say that most Americans are tired of wars that the U.S. has engaged in, but at the same time, they're not really cognizant of the extent to which U.S. military power through these bases is wielded around the world. Could you remind us how many U.S. bases are there in the world? How does that compare to other countries in terms of having bases, military bases on foreign soil?
Yeah, adding U.S. troops to 4 new bases in the Philippines is simply unnecessary and wasteful on top of an already
Well, Moss, that's the thing. I do, even though I think Democracy Now! Has fallen victim to some of these campaigns, playing on people's human rights sympathies to try and gin up support for these issues. To their credit, I think they've at least pushed back a little bit on this lately when it comes to holding interviews with VJ and Noam Chomsky about Ukraine, doing this kind of reporting. I know they've fallen victim to these kind of things before, but to their credit, it hasn't been a complete capitulation to these kind of narratives. But talking about Xinjiang and the Uyghur stuff, I think that's a good example of what it's going to be like when this conflict inevitably does kick off with China, whenever that is, because that's what it's going to be, right? It's you support President Xi, you support Putin, you support war, you support genocide, you support there are all these brutal crimes that they accuse China of, and all of us are going to have to be strong enough and confident enough in our analysis and our understanding of these things, these forces, to be able to hold fast in our opposition to this, no matter what people say. I think that's one thing I've been trying to come to grips with over the course of doing this show now, going on 3 years, which is understanding that we need to, no matter what, maintain this analysis, no matter what people say about us, because we heard it a lot in Russia and Ukraine, and it's, like I said, it's going to be turned up even more. The burner is going to be turned up even hotter when this conflict eventually does kick off. The U.S. is like when you stick your finger in the sibling's face and say, "I'm not touching him." It's literally that. It's literally that. It's a funny analogy, but that's quite literally what the foreign policy strategy is.
Astronomically wasteful Pentagon budget. In addition to the potentially 9 U.S. bases in the Philippines, the United States already has...
Hasn't VJ reported that Xinjiang province is a major manufacturing hub of China? Yeah, and when America says we're so concerned about human rights and genocide that we're going to sanction companies that do business there, that's the reason. It's not because they care about human rights. It's because they're trying to economically weaken this region. Like we've talked about before, people that live in that region, as well as a lot of other places across Chinese territory, have seen this huge increase in their living standards and their infrastructure over the last, especially the last 10, 20 years, for these exact reasons, And a lot of these narratives are a way to weaken that. And you can destabilize those places when you make it harder for people to get jobs there in this manufacturing industry. By accusing them of committing brutal human rights crimes and then sanctioning them as a result, you make it more difficult for people in those regions to make a living, which makes it less stable.
By the Pentagon's own count, 313 U.S. military base sites in East Asia alone. And that's part of a larger global network of around 750 U.S. military bases outside of the
exactly,
States
Dan.
and Washington,
And they've been
D.C.
funding separatist movements in Xinjiang for the last 30 years. And directly bordering Afghanistan. And a lot of the destabilization that resulted as a result of the brutal Western invasion of Afghanistan led to destabilization and radicalism there, which then the Chinese had to try and confront.
According to a list that the coalition that you mentioned that I'm a part of, the Overseas Base Realignment and Closure Coalition, a transpartisan group of folks that we've been keeping. And
119 military bases in Japan.
US
That's so
in
fucked
some
up.
80 countries and colonies around the world. is more bases than any nation, empire, or people in world history compared to China. Again, and I think this helps underline the fact that China is not a conventional military threat to the United States, and that can't be emphasized enough in this moment of ballooning China fear-mongering, a kind of really racist fear-mongering that's both.
See, I'm happy to know that Democracy Now! Is still promoting this kind of coverage.
Fueling anti-Asian racism. In this moment, we need to remind people that China is not the threat that the Soviet Union was at the height of the Cold War. China is not about to attack California or Hawaii or Guam or Alaska.
By the U.S. accusing them of genocide in Xinjiang, they prevent economic development, fostering more people to turn to conservative foreign movements to the region, like what's been going on for 30 years, which causes destabilization, which prevents BRI progression, and it invites pushback, which then gets spun into look how evil and authoritarian and cruel the Chinese government is. It creates this feedback loop, right? It's this fucking feedback loop. And as difficult as it is when these narratives are going on to try and stand up or try and have the correct analysis of it, I mean, that's exactly why it's so hard. And then the whole NGO complex gets involved, and you hear from all the Ned-sponsored Uyghur and other ethnic groups that are accusing them of all kinds of things. And it's like, it's just so insidious. And then all the weapons manufacturing sponsored think tanks get in on the narratives as well, and you see them then being invited into these news programs, and they're all part of this blob that this guy's talking about. All the NGOs, all the think tanks, all these Ned sponsored ethnic groups, they're all part of that same blob. The feminist podcast about Xinjiang hosted by a former CIA officer. That's right. That's where the information from there is coming from. And people still say, Dan, and this is a frustrating thing, isn't it? People still say, what? You ask these questions? What? Well, you support genocide. Like, it's very frustrating, and it's upsetting to be accused of that when you're engaging in what I think amounts to just basic pattern recognition. And literally just saying like, oh, here's someone making this claim. They come from this NGO. They come from this ethnic minority group. They come from this think tank. Oh, who sponsors them? Oh, the fucking U.S. government and the arms manufacturing industry? That's kind of suspicious to me. And people say, why do you support genocide? You know, it's sick.
China is a threat to neighbors, and they have every right to be afraid. But the response to that fear, the response to any military threat that China does pose regionally is not
a huge cross-section of the West seems to think that the last lie was the last lie they'll be told, and they buy the next one. That's right.
The comparison with China's military presence globally
no matter how many
is
times,
helpful.
No matter how many times they lie, no matter how many times they use the exact same strategy, the exact same playbook, well, this time we got to listen to them. This time we got to listen. Like how many, this is the question, right? How many times do they have to do the same thing? The exact same story, the exact same playbook. It's been like 70, 80 years of this like US-led global hegemony. Can we start to just understand these basic patterns of behavior now? You know, like people say, oh, the Euromaidan wasn't a coup. It was this democratic thing. When you see American politicians there, you have the calls from Victoria Nuland, you have the footage of John McCain and Lindsey Graham talking to the Azov guys. Like, how much fucking more evidence do you need? Along with just the basic understanding of what the last 70 or so years of history has been. How many times are you going to fall for the exact same thing over and over and over again? You know? It's frustrating. I'm happy to know that like some people end up getting it. But this whole last year has been a very eye-opening experience for me, seeing how many people who I thought would know better completely just swallow all the same lies and repeat all the same propaganda and just get pulled right down the same path yet again. It's been very frustrating. Yeah, you can't point out moments in history that you'd be called a Putin apologist. That's right. It's Kremlin propaganda to talk about history in this way. This is why a little concept known as historical materialism is very valuable in our understanding of these geopolitical happenings. A concept that was pushed forward and defined particularly by one very famous socialist leader whose name escapes me right now. But whoever they are, I'm sure they did some pretty good things.
China has about 8 foreign military bases, one in Djibouti and some on human-made islands in the South China Sea. This, compared to the 750 U.S. military bases outside the 50 states and Washington, D.C., shows again how misdirected.
I'm sorry to report, but my community voted your community the number 2 histomat community on the internet. I'll take it. I mean, that's still there's a lot of people on the internet. There's a lot of communities, so number 2 is still very good. I actually watched that, Dan, because I watched back the part of your clip where you reacted to my egg licking incident yesterday. So I actually saw that. That was very funny.
Our priorities are because of this foreign policy that has been, in my mind, hijacked by the military-industrial complex, the people who are making a killing, often literally.
I mean, it hasn't even been hijacked. It's been these are just the people that have run this thing for the whole modern history of America.
Precisely the wrong path.
And could you talk as well about where are the areas of expansion of U.S. Military bases? I'm thinking particularly, for instance, of the U.S. footprint in Africa, in Eastern Europe, of course, and as a contradiction, the lack of a U.S. military presence in Latin America because of the resistance of Latin American nations to such bases.
There has been pushback, and virtually anywhere that you see U.S. military bases, people face daily irritation. There are a range of views about
US same Lenin smash. Yeah, it's not hijacked. It's working the way it's intended to.
But even in places where
I hate the analysis that things just went bad, like we were good at some point in history. Exactly. It was not. It has not been hijacked. These are the people that have been running the show since at least the end of World War II. Or really since America has existed as a country. But even just talking about modern history here, it hasn't been hijacked. And in fact, when there was a president of the United States that said, like, I don't know about some of these things, like maybe we should pull back on some of these things, or maybe we should examine, who has the power in these institutions and who doesn't. And they said, right, that's a very good idea, Mr. President. Now, why don't we take a nice trip down to Dealey Plaza? Wouldn't you like to go for a nice drive now, Mr. President? Nice little joyride?
And crimes that lead to irritation and
it's nice out today.
The other thing that's really helpful with the
drop the top
incident, you saw,
I watched JFK. It's so great. It's so fucking great.
And the understandable, to some extent, fear, even though of course
full steam ahead, sir. Yeah.
No military threat to anyone in the United States. Imagine if China were to announce that it was going to build a single base anywhere near the borders of the United States. We saw the reaction
Cuba.
To an unarmed balloon that posed no military threat. Imagine China was to announce that it was going to build a base, for example, in Mexico or Canada or the Caribbean. There would be calls for an immediate military reaction. And meanwhile, the United States is in the process of encircling China with more and more bases. And this has been a long-standing buildup over years, dating to the Obama administration, the Trump administration, continued
Give Cuba another nuke. Absolutely, I support that.
The George W. Bush administration. There are, of course, also a buildup of bases.
This MF said violently.
In recent months in Eastern and Central Europe in reaction to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But the buildup in East Asia is one we should be deathly concerned about, I'm sorry to say. This, again, is escalating military tensions with the buildup of bases, not just in the Philippines, but an even larger buildup in Okinawa, in Australia, in Guam. at precisely a moment where we need to be moving in another direction. We need to be moving in a direction of building up embassies and diplomats, not bases and troops, to do everything we can to build a cooperative, again, if challenging, relationship of coexistence, peaceful coexistence, cooperation to address the threats that face everyone in the region and around the world, beginning with the kinds of territorial disputes one sees between China and the Philippines. These are territorial disputes that don't have to be intractable. The U.S. government can play an effective and constructive role in helping to resolve these sorts of territorial disputes, as well as dealing with the tensions in the relationship with China, moving toward arms treaties, the kind of arms treaties we saw during the Cold War that helped tamp down military tensions between the Soviet Union and China. So one of the things I am calling for is the Biden administration.
Well, you see, like talking about this, like, oh, the U.S. can help and all this kind of language. You see how I think paralyzed people are, even when they're out there making great analysis about this process of China being militarily encircled. They still have to couch the language and like, but still, it doesn't mean that I support them or that I don't support anything they do. This is what I reject over here on TRRS. I reject this kind of this need to couch all your language and like, but also they're still not great and everything. I refuse to do that. I refuse to play that game. So surely you don't support China though. And I say, yes, I do. I do support them. I think they not only I think should we do thought experiments about what would happen if the Chinese built military bases in Cuba or Mexico. I think that they should do that. And I would support them doing that. Yeah, we're calling in the U.S. government to XYZ. I think the guest is in wishful thinking territory right now. That's the whole thing. It's like the whole purpose of the U.S. government is to not do these things. And as we found out, as certain people found out in Dealey Plaza that fateful day, they're the ones that run the country. They haven't been hijacked. They're the ones that are calling the shots.
And hopefully they have done this already. The Biden administration should be rescheduling the visit of Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to China and engaging in a process.
It's like that's the analysis that just doesn't go all the way, right? It's almost there. It's like we're encircling them militarily, so we should now re-engage diplomatically instead, rather than saying like, we need to disengage. We're the ones that are the aggressors, including the Biden administration. They're not going to correct this. They're not going to course correct this. They're not going to change their strategy. This is the strategy, and we're talking about it right now. This strategy of belligerence and antagonism, that's the strategy, and it's going to continue. That's what the U.S. government is for. That's what its bosses are the people that control it want.
Between senior leaders of the two governments, including Xi and Biden. They can work together, and we must push them to work together rather than moving in the direction of further military escalation. That, again, I think we have to be very plain about this. The risk of even accidental military clash between U.S. and Chinese forces grows by the day as long as we increase the kinds of military buildup that we have been pursuing for years that is only encouraging China to respond in kind, to build up its military forces, raising the risk of a military confrontation, which again could.
This was exactly the whole history of the Soviet Union, also.
Into a nuclear war
Exact
between
strategy.
the two most powerful nations on Earth that could literally end human existence on Earth.
David Vine, I want to just ask, because we just have a minute to go, about something you tweeted yesterday, saying that on Wednesday, tomorrow, Human Rights Watch will release an unprecedented report about crimes against humanity committed by the U.S. and UK against the Chagossians. That's the people of Chagos and Diego Garcia. Can you explain what this is about in just a minute?
So the United States built a major military base on the island of Diego Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean in the 1960s in 1970s. In the process,
this is what happens in these
British government,
where the American
removed the entire
security state builds their
Chagosian
military
people. They
bases.
deported them 1,200 miles away, left them in impoverished exile, paid them no compensation, gave them no choice about leaving their homes, and proceeded to build up a major military base that has played key roles in all the U.S. wars in the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Chagosians have been demanding the right to return home, have been demanding proper compensation, and have been ignored almost completely ignored by the United States, by successive administrations. And tomorrow, Human Rights Watch will be releasing a major report announcing that they are charging both the United States and Britain with crimes against humanity for the forced deportation and
the human rights defenders and respecters have logged on,
as well as racial.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
A racist crime where U.S. administrations.
Thank you, Diego, for the gifted sub. Thank you.
Have avoided their responsibility for far too long, and in addition to moving in a profoundly different direction in terms of our overall foreign policy, a direction of diplomacy and cooperation, the United States government should be finally acknowledging its responsibility for past crimes like that committed against the Chagosian people, and allowing them to return home and providing proper compensation, as well as assisting in the resettlement of the Chagos Islands, including Diego Garcia.
David Vine, I want to thank you so much for being with us, professor of anthropology at American University, co-founder of the Overseas Base Realignment and Closure Coalition, author of The United States of War, a global history of America's endless conflicts from Columbus to the Islamic State, and Base Nation, how U.S. military bases abroad harm America and the world.
So yeah, I think we can point out ways that that kind of analysis doesn't go far enough, but I am happy that this kind of reporting is happening on Democracy Now! Even though Democracy Now! Has not always been like fantastic on these issues, I am happy that they're still doing this, even as this rush for more conflict is going on. Top story on CBC right now is titled, "How Ukraine Learned to Stop Fighting Wars the Soviet Way with Canada's Help." Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. There's a couple things I wanted to just finish up on. I don't know if I have as much time as I thought we would to talk about it. But two things here. Like, while we're talking about, the way that we talk about Russia or Russians as being like inherently bloodthirsty people that are just out for conquest, and they just love violence and death and destruction, and we're of course the human rights defenders and respecters. A couple things from this like brutal, completely out of control regime in Israel, which is now just like gone completely mask off with their completely outrageous, like out of control behavior on the global stage. Like this is just sickening. You have Israel right now, our ally, right? Our strong ally. And we always love to talk about the ties between Canada and Israel, and the ties between the United States and Israel, and the unshakable friendship and partnership that we have. And how we can lecture Russia, we can lecture China about their violence and their human rights violations, or their lack of respect for other sovereignty, while our close ally engages with the world like this, bombing a residential area in Damascus, killing 15 people, in Syria, in a place that's still recovering from a devastating earthquake, an earthquake that they're having a harder time recovering from because of Western sanctions, because there's been a civil war, which is also a proxy war between NATO and American forces, and a government that they want to destabilize. There's been that situation, exact same situation going on for years now. The country's been devastated by that violence, which it's exactly as we did in Ukraine, directly funded and contributed to. We're sanctioning them to make it more difficult to recover from this massive disaster. And now our strong partner on the global stage, Israel, is fucking bombing civilian areas in Damascus while they're still recovering from this devastating earthquake. And I mean, this just, to me, shows the hypocrisy. It shows the hypocrisy of this entire rules-based international order, this colonial mentality that we've been talking about. I mean, there's no more of a stark example of it that we can talk about. You know, our steadfast commitment to human rights and sovereignty and democracy, and of course supporting the endless right of Ukrainians to defend themselves. Right, these Ukrainians have the right to armed defense of their sovereignty against this like invasion, while simultaneously denying the Palestinians the exact same right. We deny the Palestinians the ability to engage in armed resistance to their own occupation and the constant bombings and the constant assault that they're under. You know, we're looking at this bombing of Syria the other day, but it's happening in the West Bank right now as well. And like, again, look at the way that this gets talked about in our media. Like, look at the way that we talk about Russia in our media. Or are you talking about, the Ukraine, like the headline that we just talked about? Ukraine's learning to fight wars not the Soviet way, with our help. And meanwhile, our allies are in there killing 9 Palestinians, according to the Globe and Mail. Look at the way they fucking write about this. Killing 9 Palestinians in West Bank clash. At least 57 Palestinians, including gunmen and civilians, may have been killed in 2023, the Palestinian Health Ministry says. That's the way they report on that in Western media. While Israel's going into this, into the West Bank and just like indiscriminately shooting and injuring people. 10 Palestinians killed, over 100 injured as well. And this is what they describe as a clash. Again, a clash between one of the most well-funded, well-financed, highly armed, highly sophisticated militaries in the world that has, soldiers and troops and bombs and mines, tanks, helicopters, all that, versus people that are not allowed to have an army. They're not allowed to engage in armed resistance, and are precious, these precious rights that we bestow on Ukrainians to engage in this armed struggle, which are just completely denied by them. And in fact, when Palestinians do pick up a gun or a bomb or even a fucking rock, they get talked about in our press as being like terrorists, extremists, Islamists, whatever it is, anti-Semites, what have you. And again, this is the complete fucking rank hypocrisy that we have when we lecture other countries about human rights or sovereignty or this rules-based order. It's just completely fucking preposterous. I wanted to look at the actual details of this. This so-called clash. This is Gideon Levy.
If to quote here the late Golda Meir, whom I quoted also last time, I know, but it is so unforgettable I have to use it again. She once said that we will never forgive the Arabs for forcing us to kill their children. We are the victims. We are forced to kill their children.
It's the same mentality, right? We're not even singling out Israel. This is the mentality of the rules-based international order countries. Why did you force us to do this? It's not just Israel. Israel is our close ally because they help uphold this rules-based international order, and they help uphold colonial hegemony. They're a colonial foothold for the Western powers.
Poor us. And as the victim and the only victim in history, again, it enables us the rights to do whatever we want, and nobody is going to tell us what to do because we are the only victims. To this, there is a third very deep-rooted value, and this is the very deep belief, again, everyone will deny it, but if you scratch under the skin of almost every Israeli, you'll find it there. The Palestinians are not equal human beings like us. They are not like us. They don't love their children like us. They don't love life like us. They were born to kill. They are cruel. They are sadists. They have no values, no manners. Look how they kill us. This is very, very deep-rooted in Israeli society, and maybe that's the key issue. Because as long as this continues, nothing will move. As long as most of the Israelis don't perceive the Palestinians as equal human beings, we are so much better than them. We are so much developed than them. And we are so much human than them. As long as this is the case, all our dreams, and we have some dreams, and I'll get to them, all our dreams will never become true as long as this core issue will not change.
This is our mentality, you know. This is the colonialist mentality. And Israel, I think, is just like an extreme example of it. That's why we're allied with Israel, though, is because we share this exact same mentality. When it comes to Israel's view of the Palestinians, or when it comes to our view as the West, the global North, the rules-based international order, whatever you want to call it, that's our view also of the rest of the world, which we view as our dominion, and we view the people that are against that to be less human than us. It's the exact same mentality.
If those
In all honesty, folks, I'm having a bit of a weird moment here because I wasn't familiar with that person, Gideon Levy, Israeli journalist. And I'm just going to be straight up with you. Like, while we were watching that clip, I assumed that he was criticizing the Israelis' mentality. But from the reaction that I was seeing in the chat, I think was he just unironically saying those things? I'm having kind of like a mind-blown moment here. Because it was so fucking fascist and racist that I just assumed that he was criticizing Israel and not expressing his sincerely held beliefs. I'm genuinely a little confused right now. He's a critic of Israeli policy. Okay. Because I just saw people in the chat that were reacting like he was just uncritically repeating these things. Okay. Thank you, Carnova. Thank you. Okay. He was saying this is what people believe. Okay, so that was my initial thought. I got a little confused by some of the reaction that I was seeing in the chat there. That's right. I'm blaming you. I'm blaming the chat. But he was accurately describing, though, I think, what this mentality is.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Did my sub finally work? Even the subbing here is subversive.
Thank you, Aximom, for the 9 months of Tier 1. Thank you very much. It did work, and I appreciate that a lot. Oh, and you know what? And someone else renewed their gift sub a few minutes ago as well, and it didn't update. I'm going to go ahead and update that in the sub goals to make sure there's no tomfoolery or shenanigans going on when it comes to counting the subs. But I must make one final request, folks, because 2 or even just 1 very generous chatter could get to the sub goal today, could get us across the finish line. As you know, for our most generous 10 sub gifters, there is a very fun alert.
You can count on me.
That plays.
Have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
There's a very fun and exclusive and exciting and elite alert that plays for our most generous 10 sub gifters. Thank you, Lady Cenobite, for the 13 months tier 1. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, Rob. Seriously, wow.
You can count on me.
It never
and
gets
good
old.
Rob to talk you through all this.
It just
I've
never
been robbed.
It never gets old. Oh my goodness.
You can count on
Dakadoon.
me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS Lenin.
Dakadoon, thank you very, very much for the 10 gifted subs. That's very kind of you. I'm sorry I sent you a passive-aggressive AI-written email criticizing you for focusing on your job and career and not this community. I apologize for that. That was a friendly ribbing. And again, I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you also to Becoming Kyle for the 2 months of tier 1. Thanks, Kyle. And thanks, Ian DJ Cooper, for the 18 months tier 1 as well. Thank you. And just like that, Rob and his family could afford dinner, and his cruel Mountie landlord cried all night. That's right. Yeah. Absolutely right. A friendly ribbing. Like a healthy jostle. That's right. It's just a healthy jostle. Well, yeah, I really appreciate that, Dakadoon. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Very kind of all of you for supporting this content. And again, I'm not a PSYOP. This totally non-PSYOP content. This totally non-PSYOP,
You can count on me. You're going to
non-cult,
have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
non-pyramid scheme. Thank you also to Lennon Smash for another gifted sub. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. I've suspected a lot. There's others that I suspect of being psyops. There's people that I would not even mention because I don't want to arouse any controversy. Oh boy, I do think there's a number of psyops going on. It's not just Gray Zone and Jimmy Dore. I think across this independent left media space, we got to be careful. We got to be careful out there. We got to be careful out there. Not to name names. Not to name any names. Who do we got here? There's several unsubbed folks in the chat. Can I help someone out who can't afford a sub? We got Aximom throwing out an opportunity for a gift sub if anyone wants it. If anyone wants it. If there's some TRRS curious chatters and lurkers out there, we got an offer of a gift sub. MF's love showing up in my chat like, don't you think we've reached the limit for peaceful resistance? Is this where we sign up to do crimes? I'm not a PSYOP. It's not true. That is not accurate.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Boom.
Thank you, James, for the 22 months of Tier 1.
Use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Not a PSYOP. Oddly what a PSYOP or cult lead would say Monka HMM.
Thank you, Useless. Thank you for the 500 friend kind. I really appreciate it. As I pointed out at the beginning of the show, I can't guarantee that I'm not an inadvertent PSYOP, okay? I can't guarantee that. I don't know who you folks are. There's some people that have supported this show. Maybe there's some feds laundering money through Twitch and supporting this content without me knowing about it. I don't know. I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that that's not going on. But I'm definitely not like a knowing participant in any kind of a psychological operation.
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Aximom, for the gifted sub. I really appreciate the support. Any one of us could be a sleeper agent. Well, that's why I was saying earlier in the stream. It's like I think many of you are probably just sitting in like a troll farm, Langley. You're all hanging out in the warehouse together. You clock in every day and hang out in the chat. You clock out. Take it from John Cipher. Openly says in the chat that I'm not a PSYOP. Thank you for the stream. To me, you're probably not a PSYOP. That's the bet. I'll take it. I will take it. I will take that. Who do we got here? Oh, and I can't raid. Good. My favorite. My favorite. I love when that happens. I love it. I think it's so cool. I didn't even see that there was a hype train happening. I didn't even see that there was a hype train. Jesus. What the hell's going on? Do I need to continue this? Should I continue the hype train? Should I show the video one more time? Has everyone seen the TRRS orientation video? It's okay, I re-signed in so I can raid now. That's why sometimes I just like somehow randomly get signed out. By the way, I just can't raid any other leftists. It's so strange. No, I didn't notice the hype train because I wasn't getting it. I was like logged out and didn't get a notification. It's very strange.
Thank you for expressing interest in the Friendship
While the hype train's
Triangle
going,
community.
about a minute left.
We would be thrilled to have you on board as a member of our exclusive platform.
Does this
As
look
you
like a
may know,
PSYOP to
the
you?
Friendship Triangle is Twitch's only two-dimensional, triangle-shaped, friendship access and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. Today you have an amazing opportunity to join the base level of the Friendship Triangle system. Once you are part of the community, you'll have the ability to rise through the ranks and achieve higher levels of access and rewards. One way to do this is by gifting subscriptions to your fellow members or by inviting your friends and family members to join our community. As you ascend the tiers, you will be exposed to a range of new and exciting benefits, such as exclusive content, advanced features, and access to our elite community members. We are confident that you will enjoy all the perks that come with being part of the Friendship Triangle. However, we also want to remind you that not all friends and family members are to be trusted, especially those who may not support your new lifestyle. That's why we encourage you to focus on building meaningful relationships within our community, where you will find like-minded individuals who share your interests and values. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We are always here to support our members and ensure that your experience with the Friendship Triangle is enjoyable. We're glad that you are considering joining the Friendship Triangle community. We look forward to seeing you rise through the chaos zone and all the way into the elite tier. It's not a cult.
There we go. One last time. I was very much inspired by the Dharma Initiative video. Absolutely. Anyway, give my regards to Starlight Dazzle. Birthday Starlight. Everyone, happy birthday Starlight Dazzle in the chat immediately after the raid. See you tomorrow.